fix that uneven power dynamic between the public school monopoly and individual families is to have the funding follow the child. Look, the way I see it, if your grocery store doesn't reopen, you could take your money elsewhere. Your neighborhood Walmart doesn't reopen, you could take your money to Trader Joe's. Similarly, if your public school doesn't reopen, families should be able to take their children's education dollars elsewhere. And the way I see it as well is that every single school district should have the choice to reopen or not. Every single teacher and teachers union should have the choice to return to work in person or not. But every single family needs a choice too. We need to extend that logic all the way down to the local level. And the only way that you're going to do that and to allow for that bottom-up accountability and competition is to allow the money to follow the child to whatever educational setting works best for them. That could be a charter school, that could be a private school, that could be a home-based option. And that will realign the incentives and give more power to the individual families so that schools have real, meaningful incentives to meet their individual needs. And also, I'm optimistic because of the latest data that we've seen in support for school choice. It could be partially because families are seeing that they're getting a bad deal. Some families have been getting a bad deal for decades, but this year, the power imbalance has been illuminated by seeing the response to COVID between different sectors and how it, in some places at the 11th hour, families are getting emails saying, well, you're supposed to reopen your school today, but we're not going to have enough employees showing up in so many places across the country. And families are getting fed up with this. They're seeing that closed buildings are continuing to get their education dollars while they're stuck scrambling, trying to pay out of pocket for private school tuition and fees, trying to figure out home-based instruction and trying to cover the costs associated with home-based instruction. And so families are seeing that, well, why can't some of those dollars follow my child to an educational setting that works best for them? And that still could be the public school. A lot of public schools might be doing remote learning really well. And some public schools are open for in-person instruction. And for so many people, the remote version of learning could work. But for an individual family where that doesn't meet their individual needs, they should be able to have a choice to take their money elsewhere. And the latest survey from Real Clear Opinion Research actually found that there's been a surge in support for school choice initiatives in just a few months. Between April and August 2020, support increased from 67% to 77%, a 10 percentage point jump or a 15% relative increase from just a few months ago. And families are empowered right now and energized to find alternative options. EdChoice survey, similarly at the national level, also found that between the spring and fall, and also since 2019 and 2020, support for charter schools, private school vouchers, tax credit scholarships, and education savings accounts have each seen a jump, significant jumps from the previous year. And so families are really excited about school choice. Support for education savings accounts among families, according to the latest survey from EdChoice, is about 86% support. Families are mobilized, states are introducing legislation, and 2021 might be the year of school choice. So I'm really optimistic. It's good to see you guys, and I'm interested to hear what everybody has to say for the rest of the day.
Fantastic, Corey. We love your optimism. There's a lot of it in this crowd. We need it, because we've had some issues, but there's a lot going on. I think it's going to be good. And thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you in person soon. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave.
Okay, take care. Thanks again. It's my pleasure to introduce the school choice fighter in New Jersey, the eminent Dr. Bob Bowdon, the founder of Choice Media TV, a national figure, but a wonderful trustee and helper to E3 for many, many years. Bob has a great fireside chat lined up for those of you who were last year. You can see it. I don't see the fire behind him, maybe a candle, but I do see Bob. So Bob, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. First, thanks to you for being so instrumental in organizing all this. And yes, no fire, although this house almost burned down about 1.5 years ago. So if we'd have tuned in that day, there would have been fire. I like to say, one of my favorite things to do is to talk to the great Laura Waters in these events each year. And so for those who don't know, njleftbehind.org is the best source of information about New Jersey education. So bookmark that. If you're not already familiar with it, become familiar with it, njleftbehind.org. And so, Laura, first, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm
Okay.
tired of being on Zoom, but happy to be with so many fellow warriors.
Yes. Well, I wanted to begin by just sharing my screen. I don't know if the organizers can make this full, but I have a photo I'd like to start with, which I just hit share now. And I don't know if you guys can tell me if this is full up. Is it?
Yes.
All right. So, Laura, I don't know what we're looking at right now. Perhaps you can explain to the viewers what this is. I don't know if it's, in the era of Photoshop, God knows what sort of crazy images can be concocted. Is this U.S. Senator Cory Booker supporting school choice and holding a sign in his own handwriting to do so? And in your opinion, if this image is real, what sort of transition have we seen from the senator?
Actually, I think the U-turn he made came from the other direction. Cory Booker was originally very instrumental as mayor of Newark in igniting the charter sector, which is now considered one of the top two in the country. The other one is Boston. It currently educates about 35% of all Newark students in New Jersey's largest school district. And he was a really fine, smart advocate for the charter sector and school choice in Newark as mayor. Then when he decided he wanted to be president, he did what Democrats, and just sharing, I'm a Democrat, lifelong Democrat, he did what Democrats are practically required to do during a presidential campaign, which is to woo the teacher unions. So in that phase of his derangement, he decided to criticize charter schools and voice support for what Cory just called the public school monopoly.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, and we know that he's not in charge of New Jersey state policy for education and school choice, obviously. But writ large, is this a metaphor for how Democrats around the country have flipped? We had an era where Arne Duncan, appointed by Barack Obama, was a charter school supporter, et cetera. Not really seeing that so much from the Biden administration, are we?
No, that's worrisome. It's especially worrisome because this country needs a really strong two-party system. And right now the Republicans are in disarray. And I fear that the Democrats won the White House largely because of the really important constituency of Black voters. And Black voters, according to surveys by groups like Education Next and Democrats for Education Reform, the majority of those parents support school choice, particularly charter schools, and particularly in urban centers. Okay. And so, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I was just going to say, let's try to just come back home though a little bit. I know we're short on time, but so the former commissioner of education in New Jersey, Mr. Parlett, before that, he had run arguably the least fiscally responsible district in the state, Asbury Park. But Mr. Parlett was replaced as commissioner by Governor Murphy. Your thoughts on that? Is this, well, you tell me.
Well, if you've looked at my blog, you know my feelings about Parlett. I thought he was incompetent. I don't know why he was chosen. Nobody seemed to know why he was chosen. His replacement is Angelica Allen McMillan, and she is a former executive county superintendent of Morris County. I don't have really an opinion about her because I don't know very much about her. That is partly because she's new and partly because DOE in New Jersey has been silent through most of the pandemic.
Okay, so one might say, at least if we went from incompetent to blank slate, that sounds like a potential improvement from your point of view.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And people I've spoken to are hopeful that she will
let's talk about COVID and shutdowns. Some praised Governor Murphy for giving districts, rather than a one-size-fits-all shutdown policy, as many states have done. Governor Murphy said districts should decide their own reopening policies with respect to COVID. How has Murphy been on the shutdowns?
I think you can look at it in two ways. In one way, he's honoring local control. He's honoring the disparity in contagion rates and test positivity rates, not only from county to county, but from district to district. Where I think he falls short is that when you have local control, what that means is that you can't really do anything without the union's approval. That's in a traditional public school district. So for instance, you have a case in Montclair where last night the district sued the teachers union because they were supposed to start a hybrid learning component for K through 3, I think. And the teachers refused to show up, both for a professional development day and also for the first day of school. They said they're not coming in. They put pictures of themselves on Instagram with the hashtag business as usual. So I think that when Murphy left it to districts, there was a sense of abandonment. The DOE should have stepped up to fill that void by issuing more clear guidance about when schools should be open. The DOE should have been on top of the digital divide, which they're still not. So the DOE, it's an interesting case where school closures have affected all of our kids, and the DOE has not really done anything. So
I don't know if people can see, I did also share the screen on the NJ Left Behind coverage of, I guess you took it from Montclair Local, but about the Montclair district suing the teachers union. Has this, so of course, most New Jerseyans don't live in Montclair, but is this, you think, spilled out across the state, meaning people are reframing their view of teachers unions as they're beginning to see the unions being the obstacle to open schools?
It's such an interesting question, Bob. I was speaking with Darrell Bradford last night. Everyone, if you've been with E3 for a while, you know Darrell, and maybe even if you haven't been, you know Darrell. Anyway, so we were talking about Montclair and whether that had larger ramifications. There are parents who want their kids home. There are parents who want their kids back in school. In Montclair, let's just stick with Montclair, 64% of parents want their kids back in school. And this is in a high-income district where that's not that common, but they want their kids back. It's been a year already. And so I'm wondering if there will be able to see some daylight between parents who are so faithful to their districts and to their local unions, and who may start feeling a sense of betrayal in that the teachers, especially with those Instagram, those smiling faces with t-shirts and hashtags. I think that it's possible that the teachers unions have misplayed this. And if they did, that would help our cause.
Yeah, well, the polls are showing that nationally, as Corey alluded to, but I don't think he mentioned the change in the polls just during COVID has been much more support for choice. Something I learned about from you and only you, Laura, was the degree to which the Newark superintendent is working to thwart charter schools in a city where charter schools have been widely successful. There's at least close to a third of the footprint of enrollment in the city of Newark is charter schools. Tell everybody, what's the superintendent, Mr. Leone, doing?
Oh, it's a big problem. So the charter sector in Newark has worked really, really hard to be collaborative with the district. They share professional development, they share supplies, they share all sorts of things. They also agreed to be part of what's called Newark Enrolls, by which parents can go to one website page on the district website, and they can rank their choices of where they want their kids to go to school. And it could be a charter school or a public school, and a traditional, well, public, obviously, a public charter or a public traditional school. What the new, relatively new superintendent did, despite the fact that Newark parents, 50% of them have their first choice as charter schools, he's requiring families in the middle of a pandemic to not be able to choose a charter school. They can choose a traditional district school without submitting 3 very specific proofs of residency.
Say that again. He's making the charters do, the parents in charters.
If a parent wants to, say, sign their kid up for a KIPP school in Newark, before they're allowed to complete their form on the district website for enrollment, they have to download a driver's license, a deed or a lease for housing, and a utility bill. Now, this is
got to be a lawsuit. In other words, there's a level of proof of legitimacy to, I really do live here. I really, regarding, including driver's licenses. I mean, imagine them proposing that for voting, right? That people would go crazy. But yet, when it comes to newer charters, this one level of scrutiny for charter parents that is just blatantly not being applied to the district parents.
Well, what usually happens in Newark is you rank your choices, and then you get assigned a school. At that point, you have to produce proof of residency. And there's nothing wrong with requiring proof of residency, though during the pandemic, it makes it especially difficult because parents used to just walk into the school sometimes and do that. Why this is so blatantly political and not in the best interest of kids is that if you choose a traditional district school, just fill it in, write the name of it, and you're done until you're assigned to a school. So the charter sector is really concerned about this. It's another sign that the district superintendent, despite what he said when he was interviewing with the school board, is really out to get charters. There's other things he's done. He wrote a letter to the DOE insisting that they close 4 charter schools. Luckily they didn't listen to him with all kinds of distorted data. So it's okay.
Well, I think we get the idea. So insisting that Newark, he wanted to close 4 charter schools in Newark, and this is probably a unfortunate segue, but in regarding to closing 4 schools in Camden, a completely separate town with a completely separate issue. Tell us what's happening there. I guess the superintendent there has seen such an exodus from the regular district schools that you have half-empty buildings, right?
Right. Well, Camden has about 13,000 kids in total, and there were some charters, but then through the Urban Hope Act, which I think was in 2010, Bob, I'm not positive, they were allowed to start what's called Renaissance schools, which are hybrid charter traditional schools. And they are operated by 3 charter operating management companies, nonprofits, KIPP, Uncommon, and Mastery. And so, and they are required to take all the kids in the neighborhood. There's none of this cream, people say they cream off. There's no creaming. They take the same special ed kids. They take the same number of homeless kids, all that. So over time, 55% of Camden students are now in either a Renaissance school or in a traditional district school.
I thought it was higher than that. It's 55%. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it may grow, but that's what it is right now, because there are some expansions that have already been approved, but that's what it is.
The point being that there are now some district schools that are mostly empty buildings.
They're right now, the district enrolls 6,000 kids. They have 19 school buildings, including a brand new high school that the state paid for $133 million that will open in September and will be able to house all the high schoolers in Newark. I went back and looked at other districts that have the same socioeconomic profile and compared the ratio of students to buildings, and Camden, it's just ridiculous. There's no way they have half empty buildings. So the superintendent, Katrina McCombs, proposed closing 4 of them that are in especially bad state of disrepair. And the head of the union there, Keith Benson, has mounted this strident personal series of attacks on her and on the school board. Even
saying
though
that it's terrible to close these district schools, even if they're half empty, they should be kept open
right,
forever.
and even after his argument was that kids will have to walk too far. So McCombs, there was a school board meeting Tuesday night, said that the school would provide transportation to all kids who had to change schools for those 4 schools that will close. And right now, the district has a $40 million deficit, and that could be helped by closing down buildings and moving money towards students and instruction.
Right, but they probably also have fewer jobs if they had fewer buildings, and then
going to have to lay off.
Goal is jobs, jobs, then not kids. Then it's a different perspective. So let me ask you too about when all of the COVID stuff started and the lockdown started. There are between 20 and 30 states in the U.S. that have something called online charter schools, fully online schools. Often they use curriculum from K-12, which is a private company, or Connections Academy, which is a private company. New Jersey always resisted that, never had a fully online charter school. I've wanted to write something and have never gotten around to it, saying like, gee, how does it, how's it working for you? Parents who went along with the teachers unions, NJEA's effort to prevent a fully online school from ever forming in New Jersey. I've also long been criticizing this conflation between the district's version of online schooling that has zero accountability during COVID, where the teachers can log in if they want to, but if they don't, nothing happens at all. That is a very different thing than professional online schools that are trained in student engagement. What do you think? You think parents are going to have, how are parents reacting to the version of online that they're getting from districts?
I think it's been eye-opening to many of them. For one thing, I have spoken to a number of parents about this. They've been taken, some of them, not all of them, some of them are really happy, but others have been taken aback by how little learning goes on in a typical day. I had one mom tell me that her kid finishes all his schoolwork, which is supposedly covering all his courses, he's a high school kid, in 2 hours. And she's like, what does he do for the other 4 hours of the day? And, there's important social, emotional learning going on too. I don't mean to knock that. And for kids with disabilities, that's even more an issue. But I think parents are literally seeing into what goes on in schools. And I do think it's an opening for parents. There are parents who are discovering, and I've seen this actually more with kids on the autism spectrum, who say their kids are happier learning online. There's a kid I know in New York who's enrolled in the most elite public high school, who is learning so much more because he doesn't stick to he does everything online and goes way, way beyond what is required in his coursework. So I think there's just as there's been a shift in the workplace, there's maybe a shift in schools. In other words, they say we may never go back to a situation where everyone goes to work 5 days a week in an office or whatever. there are parents who may say, there's something to be said for online learning. And maybe that could be a permanent component. It certainly makes snow days obsolete.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, and there's borders on stating the obvious now, but I have to say it anyway. It's not, I don't think it's for everybody, but I don't think it's for nobody. And there
Yeah.
are kids who, some of them were bullied, for example, and they love the idea of not being bullied
Yes.
by learning online. There are kids who wanted to learn really fast, and they are unshackled by this kind of median lesson rate that each teacher has to pick for the middle of the classroom, and then the quicker kids are left behind, and are bored, and the slower kids are left behind, and that so tailoring the academic pace to a particular child has enormous value for some kids, and again for other kids it doesn't. So it to me it somewhat undermines this whole one size fits all monopoly model.
It also undermines the way we hand out the high school diplomas based on seat time. I mean, that's really what we do. When with Parlett and Murphy, Parlett, the former commissioner of education, and Governor Murphy, what were once really college career ready standards were they lowered them. So now you get a high school diploma either by passing a 10th grade English test and an Algebra 1 test, or if you don't pass them, you can still get a diploma anyway through a portfolio process. And so it has nothing to do with what you learn. It has to do with how many hours you sat in the classroom. And so,
and to that point, Laura, we chatted about this before a little bit, but before we were on the air, but there's a bigger picture here. I think this moment, this COVID moment, would be the moment where a gubernatorial candidate, for example, could run on changing how this works. Instead of basing education on years of seat time called grades, what if we just changed it to how much is learned, and you advanced when you conquered and you understood the material, and we ended this social promotion. It's an absurd way to run schools, that you just go on to the next, and then you just get this diploma. And there are examples of kids who can barely read their own diploma, but they've sat there long enough. Yeah. Aren't we smart enough to end that system and actually make it a competency based, just change how education is done, like you're talking about?
Yeah, it's New Jersey has struggled with this for so long. I remember we used to have a test called it was for kids who couldn't pass what used to be the high school assessment. It was called the Special Review Assessment, the SRA, and it was impossible to fail. We actually had a commissioner who was honest enough to write a white paper saying it is impossible to fail the SRA. We're giving diplomas to kids who can't read. His name is William Labrera.
And that was when the regular high school test was considered an 8th grade level.
Right.
Yeah.
So then Education Law Center, which is, I sometimes snarkily call it the legal arm of NJEA. They're largely funded by NJEA. And
snarkily, I don't see any sarcasm in that at all. It seems like a literal statement of reality.
So Education Law Center made their bones by litigating the Abbott cases. Anyway, so they wrote a paper. It was more than a paper. It was a publication called SRA Loophole or Lifeline. And what they said, what their conclusion was, which won't surprise anybody here, is that it was a lifeline, because there is, and in all fairness, there is data that shows that if a kid has a high school diploma, regardless of what standards they've mastered, that they do better in life after high school. So, and also what it does to a kid emotionally to not get a high school diploma. So they were arguing it was a lifeline. I think that it's a loophole not for students, it's a loophole for the whole education establishment. Because what it does is it enables New Jersey to say, we have a 98% graduation rate, when in fact, we're graduating kids who are illiterate. because it's a loophole. So
It is. And you can't have standards and at the same time make sure no kid is ever sad. You can't do both.
Right. Or that no kid gets what they need in order to learn. Because I believe all kids can learn. I have a multiply disabled son. He can learn. And if we were counting on our district, he wouldn't have learned as much as he did.
All right, so I think we have to wrap this part, Laura, and let other people ask you questions.
Sure.
Which, to my great chagrin, that will be not me asking the questions, but I don't know how we signal this. I guess someone unmutes themselves. Is that right, Steve? Okay, that's a yes. So if someone wants to unmute and fire away.
Hey, Laura and Bob, Pete Denton here. And thanks for what you guys are doing. It's great to see you. I just want to follow up on that comment that Laura made about graduation rates. The SRA, of course, is a huge loophole on that. But the other thing is you really got to look at the number of first graders versus the number of high school graduates. And usually the graduation rate, sometimes they take fall of senior year to graduation rate, but I think usually in New Jersey, it's the number of freshmen to the number of seniors that graduate.
Mm-hmm.
But years ago, when we looked at Camden, the number of first graders was about 12 or 1,300. And the number, and that was relatively true over a decade. The number of graduates with our lousy and easy graduation test in New Jersey was around 170 a year. That's a 15% graduation rate. Now, some of these kids, there's a lot of mobility. Some of the, there's more kids that go, get out of the system when they get to 6th or 8th grade. So you can play around with the overall accuracy of the numbers, but the number that I just quoted is not misleading. That the number of kids who were actually graduating in Camden was on the order of 15% of the first graders. And that's the human tragedy that really goes on. The other thing, you talked about Camden a little bit with the Renaissance schools. Laura, I was a little surprised when you said that only 55% of the kids in Camden were in charters or Renaissance schools now, because I also thought that number was higher. But we did a report on Camden probably 5 years ago now, maybe more, time flies. But the number of seats in Renaissance schools that were approved in the HOPE Act was, I think, either 93 or 9,600. There were 3,500 or so kids on charters at that time. I think there's over 4,000 now. And as you correctly pointed out, there were, and probably still is, about 13,000 kids in the Camden public school system. So you add the 9,600 approved, not filled yet, but approved Renaissance schools and 4,000 charter school kids, that's 100% of the kids in Camden. So here in Camden, New Jersey, we have the Democratic power structure, and give all credit to George Norcross, Democratic power boss of South Jersey, for making this happen. We're liquidating a public school system. Now, it took a hurricane in New Orleans to do the same thing, but it's Democrats in South Jersey, and with the aligned with Governor Christie at the time at the state level, to set in motion the shutting down of a public school system in Camden. The other not data point, but background that I think it's important that everybody understands, and I have to sit here and remember the facts, but the charter school, the Renaissance schools solved 3 problems with charter schools. The first one was the Renaissance schools have to take every kid that is in the local sending district, just like the public schools had to. So you didn't have a situation that exists actually with charter schools almost everywhere, that you can have a mom living literally next door to a charter school, but she can't get her kid into that school because
Pete, this is supposed to be the Q&A portion, by the way. Just
okay. All right. Let me just finish on a Renaissance school. So it solves the districting problem, and it also solves the money problem, because the Renaissance schools are authorized to spend as much as 90% of the full public school funding, which is probably 30% more than the traditional charter schools get. And there's a third big benefit. Oh, the other thing is
All right.
the
Well,
Renaissance
let's give
schools-
Laura a chance to respond to that. Laura, what do you have to say to Pete?
I guess I don't see a New Orleans situation, Pete. I think that the district will, in New Orleans, because of the hurricane, it was the first big district to go all charter. And they've had, the results are better than they were before, but there's still problems. I think that there's still going to be district schools in Camden. I don't think that's going away, but I agree with you that more and more kids are going to be in Renaissance schools. And one could make the argument that those Renaissance schools are in fact district schools. I mean, they are authorized by the district. They have to be approved by the Camden School Board. They are funded at a rate that's really close to what we fund traditional schools. So I think that I still think they'll be I don't think they're going to shut
But
down.
Laura, they're funded based on enrollment. That's
Yeah.
the key difference. The money follows the child, and
Mhm.
just like the charter schools and private schools. So they are funded at a proper amount, but if they lose enrollment, they lose funding. Where the district schools, as you see, are not. And it's also interesting, you mentioned Keith Benson. His father for many years was on E3's payroll, which is an interesting.
Seriously?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's- And you know, he went to school in Morristown, a private school. Anyway, I shouldn't have said that. I don't like
Any other questions for Laura? We have time to work in. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, Gay.
Oh,
I'm
hello.
from the Center for Garden State Families. I just wanted to address the issue of special ed students and the remote learning. I've been interacting with a parent who contacted us because her 12-year-old severely autistic child has really lost out in COVID. You're talking about some children with special needs, and I did work with special needs students during my 32 years as a teacher in public education. And I believe that this child is really lost because of the lack of follow through with the digital learning, with the programs, with all of the web problems that have been in existence. This is a very high-end town that this family lives in, a very wealthy community, very pro-education community. But this child was supposed to be online for 7 hours and getting things like speech therapy and counseling, and can't even be online for 7 minutes because of all of the issues. And there's been a tremendous emotional effect on this one child, acting out very aggressively towards the parent, towards other family members. So it was a complete disaster and is a complete disaster for this family. So I just wanted to know if Laura has any insight as to what the state is doing. I've been following some of the bills, and I'm wondering if they are addressing this problem with number one, with getting children like this back into the school setting, even if it were just for, say, speech therapy or counseling or occupational therapy, or is this just an ongoing thing and kind of as usual, children with special needs suffer more? That's how I kind of perceived it as a teacher. And I will tell you that I wholeheartedly agree that NJEA is a major, major obstacle to so many issues. And I can say I was like the frog in the cold water and it was boiling. As a teacher in my own classroom, I believe most well-meaning teachers.
Well, we just have a
not
couple
do this.
seconds here. Let's let Laura answer. Thanks.
Yeah.
I agree that it's tragic what's happening to kids with special needs. Each of them has an individualized education plan, an IEP, which is a contract, and districts are violating the contract. My sense is their primary concern is liability. Parents could sue them for a breach of contract. They will offer compensatory services that will not in any way compensate the kids. There is going to, you've described a kid on the spectrum who has had both emotional regression behavioral regression, I'm sure learning loss. And
Yes.
it is tragedy that we did not, and I put this on the DOE because it's not in the governor's portfolio.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
I was just going to wrap up by saying just quickly, Laura, how much money does the NJEA have? And just in short, this is a test of your concision. What do they spend it on?
They spend a lot of it on lobbying. They are the primary funders, as Mike Lilly has made clear, of Governor Murphy's PAC, dark money PAC. I think it's 4.5 million. They pay their officers crazy amounts of money, and they have pensions that are not part of the teachers' pensions, which are, that whole system is crashing.
And just put it in short, the total budget, are we talking like 600 million, something like that? What do they have per year?
You should, I don't know. I can't answer that. I'd be making it up, but their total, their money comes from teacher dues. Each teacher pays about $1,200 a year. And so there's
Okay,
about.
does someone else know the answer to that? Was jumping in?
We're going to have Liz will be on. Liz Parlett Butcher will be on. She has the answer. But we need to move to the wonderful award now. And I want to thank.
Well, thank you, Laura Waters, for your time here today, as well as njleftbehind.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So thanks to National School Choice Week, which is a fabulous organization, and Noelle Delaney, who is on, we're really pleased, or I am pleased, to introduce our marketing director, Colleen Authors, who is going to give an award to the winner of the I Love My School contest, which was run across the state. And not surprisingly, because there's quite a few public schools in the state, and E3 certainly supports. I know all of you support public schools. We just want to see them do better. And Claudine is our marketing director for E3, and also marketing director for our new effort, which is called Education Moms. Claudine, the mic is yours.
Okay, thanks so much, Steve. So E3 was pleased to sponsor this award in the hopes of showcasing all the great schools across the state of New Jersey. And we'd like to thank Noelle DeLay and the National School Choice for sponsoring this award, and for today's events, and for all that they do for school choice. So we asked teachers, parents, and students to tell us what they love about their schools. And we asked them to submit their entry with a photo, video, or essay. And we received close to 150 applications and some really great submissions. And we'd like to showcase some of those entries and the winning entries in this upcoming video.
Hi, my name is Larissa Wade. I'm a senior at Hillside High School located in Hillside, New Jersey. I love my school because I have such an amazing community where every day I'm able to walk in the building. I'm able to feel welcomed, loved, appreciated, and accepted for who I am. I have an amazing guidance counselor named Mr. Jones. I had a guidance counselor and then I switched over. I'm going to say like middle of my freshman year, and Mr. Jones has been nothing but a resource and outlet for me. He's helped me through my college application journey because I'm a senior, like I stated in the beginning, and now I'm probably going to Ramapo College of New Jersey. I have an amazing principal. I have a great relationship with her. I would always walk with her in the morning. She would always take care of me, pick me up at my very lows, And lastly, I have great, amazing teachers where I know I can go to if I need help at any time, and they're always able to help me.
Hello everyone, my name is Trustee Dasgupta. My school name is St. Aloysius Elementary Academy in New Jersey. I love my school because it helps me learn a lot, and I like my teachers. I love my friends, and we pray together, we play together, and I like my gym uniform as well as my school uniform. It is my most favorite place. Thank you. I love my school because the best school of my thought is my friends are the best and my teachers are the best, and also the Wakeman hours. That school I am going to. And also, I also love myself.
Great. So that was just a little taste of some of the entries that we got. So it's my great honor on behalf of E3 and National School Choice to give our grand prize of a $500 gift certificate to Larissa Wade, who is a senior at Hillside High School in Hillside, New Jersey. Larissa's submission was selected by the judging panel based on the number of tasks that she completed and the associated points for those tasks, and for the passion and effort that she put into her submission. Larissa is a very special young lady who has a bright future ahead of her, and we're sure that she will go on to accomplish whatever she sets her mind to do. It's my great pleasure to introduce Larissa Wade, and I'll turn the floor over to her.
Okay, good morning. My name is Larissa Wade. I'm from the Hillside. I'm about to be 18 as of Tuesday, and I'm going to attend Ramapo College. I want to give thanks to a couple people real quick. So I want to start off with my parents, if they're watching. I want to thank my parents, Luana and Danny Wade, for being my parents and pushing me to do my best and always teaching me that hard work pays off no matter what, and to have a great outlook and perspective on things that may or not be possible. My grandmother, who is here, Annie Waller, she's in this call. Grandma, thank you for loving me since the day my mom brought me home from the hospital, and from you teaching me how to be studious and smart about decisions and focusing on school. I love you always and forever. My teacher, Miss Silva, who's in this call, I met her 2 years ago in tomorrow's teacher's class. And the one thing that she's taught me is how to accept who you are and to be happy and enjoy life. She's taught me so much and brought joy to me on my darkest days, to her hugs and jokes and laughter we shared throughout her class, and her especially allowing me to express myself. My guidance counselor, who's here, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, thank you for allowing me to transfer over to you from the stories you shared with me, for you pushing me to get involved and constantly to do better, to prove not only to myself, but others that I'm worth everything and I deserve the world, and to share my talents with the world and people around me. My best friend, Faith, as we grew up together, we've been here for 7 to 8 years going on strong, and had many adventures and shared like conversations. Finally, Miss Sidwa, Mr. Gregory, my superintendent, well, Miss Sidwa was my principal, and Miss Randall, who was administrator at my school. You guys have supported me a lot. Miss Sidwa, my 4 years being there and me sitting and speaking out to make sure you stay in Hillside, to save your job as principal, and for Miss Randall, for me and you speaking highly of things that matter, and Mr. Gregory, for you coming to Hillside and actually listening to the students to expand Hillside into something people can see grow drastically, making the district a better place full of happiness and dreams. Thank you all so much. Hillside, New Jersey is a wonderful place to grow up in. It is such an honor to be a part of New Jersey's winner for School Choice Week. As you become older, you start to realize that life is precious and beautiful, and we all have that purpose and meaning to grow together and learn each day. I've learned that I'm blessed to learn each day, whether at school or home or anywhere I go, but take it day by day and find happiness in what you do. So when the day is done, you close your eyes for the night, you are satisfied with what you have and what you have done. please all take care of yourself and continue to love yourself, as we need this in the world right now. And once again, thank you for choosing me as New Jersey School Choice winner.
Thanks so much, Larissa. Congratulations. Just give you a round.
Thank you, Larissa. Larissa
Thank
won a
you.
laptop, so have fun with that laptop and study hard at that wonderful Ramapo College. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we are we're ready for what's referred to in the business world as a bio break. We're going to run some clips. So please stay tuned. We will reconvene at in about 5 minutes. Maybe we'll make it 7, because for some people with the palatial places like Louis Andrews, it'll take him quite a while to do whatever needs to be done. So let's say, just to be safe, let's say 11:35, and we'll run some little videos on for those of you that want to stay on. Is that okay, Sophie? Yes, it is.
Yes, that's great.
Okay, thanks.
Apologies, just 1 second.
My daughter, she's more of an artsy type of child.
Kids think differently than the way the world does, being neurodivergent.
My son loves to build things and take things apart and put them back together and see if they'll work.
I'm so proud of you, and I'm glad.
Because every kid learns at a different level. Every kid learns at a different speed, at different ways.
The way my 13-year-old learns is very different from the way my 8-year-old learns. And they're both intelligent kids, it's just they learn in different ways.
They're all different types of learners. Some are visual, some are hands-on, some are auditory.
One of my kids actually really loves school, like her attending a class, having routine, whereas my other two, they would actually love the whole outdoor setting and having things mixed up, because one of them is very scatterbrained, she's all over the place, and the other one, she actually just loves nature, she loves art.
Are they going to be able to have their strengths really highlighted? Or is it always just a matter of conforming to a status quo?
Starting from this, the ground up, I think schools need to be more open, less institutional looking and feeling, just more to offer the kids outside of the basics.
It would be nice if schools had just so many options, whether or not it's vocational training programs or AP classes, magnet programs.
In an ideal situation, she would have an input in what her curriculum would look like. She could have hands-on experience by meeting different people to help confirm her passion.
Right.
You have to focus on the curriculum and what you need to do in the classroom. However, there are opportunities to take chances. If you want to be a DJ, you can DJ after school. If you want to be a sports analyst or you want to be a car mechanic, you can take on those opportunities and you can do things outside of the classroom.
You have a choice. Your life is yours. You create your own journey. This is what we can offer you. What do you want to do? And not saying it has to be this way, cookie cutter. It's not the same for every child.
It's about engagement and actually asking them, what do you want to learn?
Yes, there are certain things they need to learn, but how are they going to choose to learn that?
There's so many little creative minds out there.
There's got to be another way.
I just want to get my kids to learn how to think and answer for themselves.
What is school choice? It's not as complicated as you might think. School choice is a way governments can give parents back their education tax dollars to choose whatever educational options they think best fit their kids. Here's how it works. It starts with you and your community. Together, you all pay income taxes, sales taxes, or both. Those taxes become the revenue the state uses to pay for education. From there, the state splits up those funds to all families based on their children's needs. Families can then use that money to purchase whichever schooling options, public, private, charter, homeschool, online, or otherwise, they think are best for their kids. An educated child has greater opportunities to succeed and to bring that success back to their community. Like to know how school choice looks today? Although it is not available to all families right now, there are 4 ways many states offer parents choice. Click to learn more about each of them.
Back to you, Steve.
Yeah. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes to give people a chance to get back in. We'll start in 4 minutes. That's a good looking beard, Jeff. I think you're muted, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'm going to shave the beard off the day I get vaccinated, though. It's coronavirus specific beard.
Ah, okay. That's like a graduation. Yeah. Getting that vaccine. Yeah. Wow. Let's see if I can see. Yeah, there's Tom. Hey, Tom.
How are you? Good to see you, Steve.
Good. Good to see you.
Good. Good, Marty. Hi.
Hi, Steve.
There's Marty. Hey, Marty. You've been on the front lines of the coronavirus war, I understand.
One of the casualties, yes.
You're looking pretty good for all that.
Well, thanks. It's it hit me for a while, but I feel I'm almost back to normal. But yeah, it took quite the toll.
So recent?
Yeah, about a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
I'm glad you're all right.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
Appreciate it.
Let's give a couple minutes for people to to reassemble here.
Good.
Hi, Regina. Thanks for coming.
Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
It's great. You've got great light in that room. That's better than any. You probably got the studio stuff too, but right?
I'm a very big light person. I need it to keep me going. So yes, I always.
I chose this room for the light too. It was this room versus our library, and I chose the light instead of the books.
Yeah.
Yeah, my shelves should be fuller, but I try to hide them with my head, you know.
There are thousands of things on your Kindle. We know that. So. Okay, so let's get started. For those of you who don't know Tom Byrne Jr., shame on you. Tom is a great New Jersey and national resource. I won't say first as an investment advisor, although that's what he does these days, but he has served on the New Jersey State Investment Council, on our former governor's New Jersey Pension and Health Study Commission. In fact, he ran that for a period of time. And maybe most importantly, kind of to speak for us, he's an ardent supporter of school choice and an ardent Democrat. He is with the chairman of the state of New Jersey Democratic State Committee and has served on a number of civic organizations and community things, and just a great guy and a great resource for New Jersey. And for us, he has been an advisor and trustee of E3 for a number of years and really a trusted counselor. So Tom is moderating a panel today on how this state, through education reform, could save money and give parents what they want. And with that, let's let it go. Tom?
Oh, thank you, Steve. Hi, everybody. My job today is really to be the MC for two really smart numbers guys, but I can't resist making just a couple of quick introductory remarks. So yeah, I'm very sympathetic to this whole movement. And for me, it kind of began on a trip to Milwaukee many, many years ago. And many of you remember Dan Gaby. And Dan and I met in 1972 in McGovern headquarters, of all places. And Dan came at this from the point of view of it being a civil right. And I'm saying, well, that makes sense to me. Rich people can afford it. Why can't we give other people the same opportunity? And, conservatives are more, well, competition, makes everybody a little sharper. And I'm sympathetic to that as well. So when I was a Democratic state chairman, and that was in the mid-90s, so it's a long time ago, and a lot's changed since then, I did a poll, and not too many people talk about polls that they did 25 years ago, and I don't remember the specific numbers, but I asked a question: how satisfied are you with the public schools in New Jersey? And the answer came back, quite positive. And then I asked another question. I said, do you feel you're getting adequate value for your money in the public school system? And I thought that I might see a marked deviation in that answer. And I really didn't. I mean, a couple percent, but that was it. And I was frankly pretty surprised by that. It's ancient data. I have no idea if that's changed or not, but it's something that, in terms of the politics of this and persuading the public, I think is an interesting point. So I think this conversation ought to be about the merits, and at the same time, we all have to be mindful of the politics of this. So, I went through the vetting process. I thought fairly seriously about running for governor last time, and finally concluded that between Murphy's independent spending, the unions and the county lines, it was kind of pointless. But I did go so far as to go through the NJEA's vetting process. And what I would say about it, and again, just to give you a little more appreciation of the political pressure, if you get 90% on most tests, it's an A- or a B+ or whatever. The vetting process is an F. And you got to agree with everything. And I remember one question said something like, the NJEA represents not only teachers, but also administrative personnel. Do you have a problem with that? And of course, the answer is no, that's great. And I said, depends. And what I meant is I remember hearing a talk by Gloria Bonilla-Santiago. And at the time, years ago, she said, our cost for custodial services in my charter school is $400 per pupil, and it's 3 times that in the public schools. So that's the kind of pressure that I think some of the politicians are dealing with. And so, so you mentioned that we started off with the thing of Cory Booker. And I've known Cory for a long time. I remember sitting in his office when he was mayor, and most of you know he played football at Stanford. And I said, Cory, if you go up the middle 5 times in a row for no yardage, do you keep calling the same play, or do you perhaps try and end around? And Cory said, precisely. So, you all know Elizabeth Warren had spoken in favor of vouchers. Bill Bradley voted for a pilot voucher program. I've had private conversations with Bob Torricelli when he was in the Senate, was sympathetic. And we talked about the Camden Renaissance schools. And if I'm repeating what you already know, excuse me for a second, but the goal was to go statewide, and Norcross realized he just couldn't get it done. So he thought, all right, the compromise will be that I'll get it done in my backyard, the part of the state that I care about the most. And Sheila Oliver had promised to post the bill, didn't promise to vote for it, just promised to post it, and didn't. And frankly, that's why she was taken out as a speaker way back when. So anyway, that's some of the political context. But anyway, let me introduce both speakers. Marty Lueken serves as director of the Fiscal Research and Education Center at EdChoice, where he focuses on research that pertains to educational choice. His work has been cited in various media, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and leading publications in the education field. A lot of his perspective on education came from his experiences teaching in Japan. And Marty, someday you're going to get my pronunciation right on the difference between anatawa kirei desu and anatawa kirai desu. I don't think I'm ever going to be ambassador to Japan because I didn't quite have that down when I was there. Anyway, so Marty holds a doctorate in education policy from the University of Arkansas and a master's in econ from the University of Missouri. So he'll go first, but before he does, let me quickly introduce Jeff Bennett. Jeff has been a public school teacher. He's been a member of the Board of Education in South Orange, and he does some of the most intelligent analysis of education data and statistics that I've ever seen. And he presents it both verbally and graphically in understandable and compelling ways. He's an expert on fairness in the funding formula, comparative costs among districts in New Jersey and elsewhere, and has a keen understanding of the revenue raising side of the equations and the constraints on that side, and does a very intelligent blog on all this. So enough out of me, at least for the moment. And Marty, unmute yourself and over to you.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'd like to thank Steve and E3 for having me here today. It's great to be here. I guess just opening it up, I just wanted to say that there are a lot of reasons for having, I think, a broad and robust education choice program in New Jersey. These programs have been around for decades, and they've benefited countless families. They improve a number of outcomes for students, for families, for communities. They improve civic outcomes and practices, educational attainment, parent satisfaction, just to name a few. So for me, I think a big reason for having, education choice is to create more educational options and opportunities, just so that families can find the best education that best fits their child's needs. I wholeheartedly, really strongly believe that parents are the ones who know what's best for their own kids. They're the ones that have the strongest incentives to provide the best education possible for them. And, whether that's a district school, a public charter school, private homeschool, hybrid homeschool, pods now, who knows what we'll have 10, 20 years from now, or God forbid the next pandemic if one were to arise. But yeah, I think that parents are the key unit, of influence for kids. So why am I saying this on a finance panel? Well, I just want to bring up that I support education choice for a variety of reasons. But with that said, lawmakers in state capitals, are also concerned about the bottom line, and they're the ones passing these bills. So how these programs impact finances and state budgets, we have to pay attention to that too. And so with that, I look forward to having a conversation with today. Thank you.
Jeff, take it away.
Oh, hi. So if you don't know me, I think of myself as an outsider in a lot of these education debates. I got involved in education budgeting in New Jersey and state aid because I was on my town's Board of Education. And one day I randomly looked up how much state aid districts were getting in New Jersey, and it made no sense. And there were so many examples of richer, smaller districts getting more state aid than larger and poorer districts. And nobody could tell me what was going on. They just kind of like implied that I didn't understand that there must be some reason for like Hillsborough to get more state aid than Bloomfield. But eventually I've just figured out like the state was just hopelessly off formula, and there was no realistic way to get the state back on formula without some redistribution. And since then I've kind of made what I see as actually like a fiscally moderate point of view, which is, we need to redistribute state aid and there are practical limits to how much we can increase taxes. Regarding me and school choice, I think I've supported school choice my entire adult life, well before I had kids. And I support school choice because I think parents should have some agency in how their kids are educated, because what's a great school for one kid might not be a great school for another kid for a variety of reasons. And also, I think if we had a more robust school choice system, families would have less of an incentive to move to the most affluent town they possibly could to access good, free, quote unquote, public schools. And if we had a robust school choice system, therefore you'd have like less geographic like segregation, and a lot of New Jersey's poor towns would not be as poor. My sister-in-law was a teacher at a Catholic school, and I could say like she did not make a whole lot of money. So if we had a robust school choice system and it ended up with a lot of teachers in religious schools like being paid better, I also think that would be a good thing. The primary reason I support school choice like isn't finance. It's not to save money. But I think in New Jersey, that really can't be ignored, because even though this is a wealthy state and a high taxing state, we're also a fiscally strapped state. I'm sure anyone here who's read about different states and debt knows that New Jersey or Illinois are neck and neck for the most indebted state in the country. And in so many ways, like actually our situation is getting worse. Like, the pension funds, like over time, gradually are losing like their funding. And the biggest pension fund we have, the Teachers Fund, is projected to zero out in the late 2020s. And at that point, the state is going to have to pay for pensions out of its like operating budget, out of taxes, which is going to induce cuts, which are like much deeper than like, anyone has really anticipated in this state. Something that I don't think a lot of people comment on in New Jersey is that over the last 20 years, the budget has been educationized. But by that, I mean that increasing share of the budget has gone to education. The budget has gone from 31% education to 41% education. And a lot of items have been flat funded for 20 years or more. For instance, New Jersey's libraries get less money now than they got in 1990. And things like municipal aid, direct tax rebates, public higher ed, they've been flat funded for decades. New Jersey, in dollars per capita, spends less on public higher ed than Alabama, and the same as Mississippi and Louisiana, New Mexico, the poorest states in the country. So, we spend more money on K-12 education and probably pre-K education than any other state, but in such a way like actually we're just spending a fortune on educating kids just to see them leave the state like afterward, in part because our public higher ed is so underfunded. There's more I'll say like in this vein, but I want to, give the floor back to Tom and Marty.
Marty, anything immediate, or I'll start with a couple of questions then and open it up.
Sure, go ahead, shoot.
All right. So look, I'm not doing anybody any favors if I just ask really easy questions and tell you all you're great and so on. So I think one of the, aside from the politics, I think one of the big, and I do want to spend some time on the positive, on the success stories elsewhere and so forth. But I think one of the biggest problems or criticisms of vouchers and choice and so on is, quote unquote, it drains resources. Now, I could go on and elaborate on the question, but I think I've said enough. So defend it. Why doesn't it drain resources? And how do you persuade, if you could sit down with legislators one-on-one and have a rational conversation, how do you persuade them on this point?
Well, so I wrote a report for E3 on the potential fiscal effects of an ESA program. And I can summarize the findings in a bit, but just broadly speaking, you're absolutely right. This is one of the most ubiquitous and pernicious, I think, arguments that is used that's used in state capitals. That school choice drains resources from public schools. Choice is going to take away money from kids. Choice is going to leave students, behind, left behind who remain in public schools. And it's really, I think, a silly argument if you consider a few basic facts. So first, there tends to be a funding gap between school choice programs and public school systems. Choice programs, on average, they cost taxpayers about less than 40% as much as taxpayers would pay to educate those same kids in public schools. I mean, it's like a 60% markdown, right? And so it's kind of incredible when you think about it to say that, well, here's one area of education that costs X amount, for this student, but then for that same student, this school choice program is 60% cheaper to the taxpayer, but we're worried about the cost of this cheaper alternative. So it's, I think it's a silly argument. There have been more than 50 fiscal analyses that have analyzed the fiscal effects of programs on taxpayers and school districts. Almost all of them show that choice saves money for taxpayers. Choice leaves it leaves more resources in public schools because public schools are the only walk of life that I'm aware of where they get to retain, the service provider, the district gets to retain funds, a portion of the funds, when they lose customers. You don't see this in hospitals, law firms, grocery stores, et cetera. So take an example, or higher ed as well. So if, for example, if a student leaves, let's say, Rutgers Newark to transfer to Princeton or wherever else, well, Rutgers is going to lose the Pell Grant funding. It's going to lose the scholarships and state, the state formula funding, scholarship funding, tuition and fees, all of it. It follows the kid. But when public schools lose a student to another school district, or if they lose a student to a private school through a choice program, or really for whatever reason, that district gets to keep all of their local funds, and they get to keep most of their federal funds because those funds are based on other factors, that's not tied to student enrollment. For example, they're based on, property wealth. Local property taxes would be based on property wealth. Federal funds are largely based on, like Title I is based on census data and other non-enrollment factors. So these arrangements basically mean that when students leave a school district to access other options through a choice program, for example, students who remain will end up with more resources. And there's also a large body of research looking at what happens to students who remain in public schools after a choice program is reduced. And so these studies are essentially asking the question, well, are students harmed or left behind somehow? There have been over 24 studies, and now these are rigorous studies, 27 studies, I believe, and 25 of those found positive effects on student learning for the students that remain in public schools when their public school faces more competition. One study found a negative effect, and then the other remaining study was unable to detect an effect. So almost all these studies find that students gain in learning. Now these aren't huge gains. They tend to be small, but they're positive. That's not harm. So public schools, to me, as far as I can see, they seem to be adjusting pretty well, and they're doing fine. So this argument that choice harms students or that choice drains resources just doesn't hold water if you think about it.
So competition keeps everybody on their toes. That's great. Helps everybody. But at the same time, let's look at this at a micro level, and maybe that's helpful, Marty. I don't know. So one kid leaves the public school and goes to the uses a voucher or a tax credit or whatever. So now whatever the number is, $6,500 or whatever, is being picked up by the taxpayer. But the marginal cost in the public school hasn't come down at all. The class size came down. But one kid is a stupid example, I acknowledge. But if 20 kids leave, presumably you could do with one less teacher, but that's not what happens in the public schools. Again, how does the money get saved? One could, if you want to do a counter argument, you'd say, well, then we're paying twice, right? Does that make sense to you, the way I framed it?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, look, the reality is that education costs do go down, and how those costs are reduced, those are local decisions made by the public school leaders, right? So if I think it's important to allow them autonomy to make those decisions, but at the same time, just because the savings aren't shown on the books, it just gets like, the savings, it's hard to track. We just don't know where they go or how they're used. But I think that one area that they do go into, which has been documented by one of our fellows, he's an economist named Ben Scafferty, is staffing. There's been there's been a large staffing surge that's been going on for decades. Spending has been going up, and if you want, like, I can share some data, that I dug up from the U.S. Department of Ed. If you look at between 1992 and 2018, student enrollment in New Jersey increased 24%. And then during that same period, hires for all staffing positions increased 59%. So you have a lot of resources going to staffing. Now, if you break that down between full-time teachers and everyone else, like me as a parent, I would prefer that those funds are going towards teachers. They have the most direct influence on my kid. You see that full-time teachers hires increased 40%. So that's about almost twice the rate of student enrollment. But hires for non-full-time teachers increased twice the teacher rate, 82%. That's also 4 times the growth rate of students. It just put in perspective, in '92, there were 14,000 or more than 14,000 full-time teachers than there were all other staff in New Jersey public schools. That's reversed. Today, there are about 8,000 fewer full-time teachers than all other staff in public schools. So I think clearly here's one instance where funding isn't going directly to teachers and not going directly to impacting students. So yeah, I mean that's just one area. So it's a complicated question, but the reality is that there are costs that do vary with enrollment. It's on a spectrum, and the more kids that leave, the more I think opportunity the districts will have to lower cost, and choice programs, just by design, how they have been designed, they are saving or they're generating, I think, fiscal benefits.
I would also say that over time, like, districts can right-size themselves. It's often politically contentious, but it can happen. For instance, about 200 school districts in New Jersey right now are losing state aid because they get more money than our state aid formula says they need. And the other 370 districts in New Jersey are getting less money than they say they need. And what you're reading about in districts that are losing largest amounts of state aid is that they're making decisions to close obsolete schools, like a school that has a terrible location, maybe because it's on a highway, or a school which had only 200 kids, even though it's an elementary school. So these districts can right size themselves. And I don't think it's only half of the equation when you look at the cuts that districts are making, because now you have private schools having greater resources than they had before. And they can do good things with that too, perhaps expand their programming, maybe pay their teachers a little bit better, maybe improve their facilities too. So, there are two parts to the equation, of course. Although I agree, it's very, very hard to get like people who are anti-voucher or anti-ESA to see benefits to private schools.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question, not to be ornery, but just to say, look, the battle here is to persuade people who, want to be open and are sympathetic, but are hearing this from the other side. So, just trying to hone these arguments and make them as persuasive as possible to legislators in particular, I think matters. So that's why I asked.
We think of vouchers and ESAs as cutting public school budgets, even if the public schools have more money per pupil than they had before. But they really increase overall education spending because you're getting families to spend their own money. So let's say a family gets a $5,000 voucher or ESA and end up spending $6,000 of their own money on tuition. You've then increased overall education spending by $1,000 because you're getting that family to spend its own money. So it increases education spending, even if it decreases the public sector's part of it. It's very, very hard to get people to see like the overall education system and not just the public school education section. But if you try to get people to see the whole picture and like the financial benefits to private schools and that you're getting families to spend their own money, like it's actually like very budgetarily good for schools. And, it probably would lead in the long run to more people being hired as teachers and other school staff.
Well, I think that's right, Jeff. And it also presumably taps into other sources of financial aid that maybe are not being fully utilized now. But of course, if the population, the transfer population gets too big, you wonder if, there's diminishing returns to that. I helped start a Sacred Heart school in Princeton, and no matter what, we reserved 10% of the budget for financial aid. But if there was increased demand for the school, I don't know if we could have gone to 15 or 20%. So that's an interesting dynamic. But let me follow up a little bit on how marginal costs might change. So Jeff, you said your sister taught in a Catholic school.
The sister-in-law, yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So if there becomes a wave, if there's more and more demand, does that start to force cost pressures up in some of these private schools? Like, hey, pay me more, or is there any dynamic there where the savings argument diminishes a little bit? Look, I think the quality argument, might get even stronger in a situation like that. But does the financial equation start to change at all? Either.
I think that New Jersey's average Catholic school teacher makes about $38,000 or $39,000 a year, and which is below the starting salary for the public schools. So if more tuition and if these vouchers ended up as salaries for Catholic school teachers or teachers at other religious schools, I would think that's a good thing personally.
Yeah, me too.
And actually for my sister-in-law, one of the schools she taught at, she only taught at 1 year because it closed. Kind of a heartbreaker there.
Yeah. Marty?
And I think this is the beauty of education savings accounts, because you can use an education savings account for more than just tuition. So you can use it for other service providers. If you need, for example, therapies or online tutoring or whatever. So I think that's going to put downward pressure on prices as well. So how that nets out, I mean, that's an empirical question. I'm not sure, but I think that if these programs are able to grow broadly enough, then that's also going to put downward pressure, I think, on the public system as well to use their dollars wisely, to better compete and to become more efficient as well. I'd like to point out too that, so this paper that I wrote for E3, which you can find on their website, I illustrated a couple of ESA programs and how they could impact and possibly improve district finances and state finances.
Yep.
These are just a couple of examples. There are so many ways to create these programs, but just to take one example, if you had an ESA, you set that to 90% of, say, the statewide average target aid per pupil, which is about $6,500. That would produce savings for state taxpayers ranging from $700 to $800 approximately per student. Now, districts would accrue greater benefits from having lower educational costs. And so overall, the fiscal benefits for taxpayers and districts are going to come to about $7,000 per student. Keep in mind that per pupil spending in New Jersey is $20,000, by the way. So that means that if 1% of public school students chose to use the program, then total savings would be about 100 million. And if 10% of programs or students use the program, which is possible, then that could generate savings worth of upwards of $1 billion. So, I mean, bottom line, the fiscal impact will be a matter of design, and programs in other states, that have been operating for a long time, they've tended to be designed in ways to generate these fiscal benefits.
Good. Listen, can't help myself here, Marty. You're talking about $100 million in savings. This Pension and Benefit Study Commission that I was on, we pointed out to legislators that we had a $100 billion problem here and we had to do something about it. And that didn't seem to register. So hopefully we'd have more success with the 100 million. We'll see. Anyway, listen, I don't want to dominate the questions here. I have plenty more that I can ask, but let me just pause here and open the floor for anyone else who has a question. And if there's silence for more than 30 seconds, I'll continue. I think we're a small enough group that somebody can just go.
I have a question. This is Liz Butcher. I'm thinking about what Laura was saying, and we're talking about the compensatory services, and I'm looking at this from a special education angle, and I'm looking at the cost savings of ESA. Is there any data out there that exists on how much potentially our school districts could save if we had the ESAs to help with the areas of tutors or service providers with some of the remediation and the learning loss that has occurred?
Yeah, so the ESA programs are relatively new. They haven't been around that long, but I mean, in general, the fiscal effect on the district will be tied to the amount of funding that goes into the account for students who are using these programs to leave the system to enroll in a different educational setting in general. So as far as the specifics, there's a little data on how those programs have been, how families have been using these. I'm right now looking at, Florida has an ESA program called the Gardner Scholarship or Gardner program. And what I've been finding is that as the program, the longer it's in operation, the more that I think parents become educated, and we're finding that the more that parents customize their child's education. By that I mean, they're not just using it for tuition, but they're using it to access other educational services, which is just a broad array. So, Arizona is, I think, another example of a kind of a relatively big, large ESA program as well, where parents have increasingly been customizing, using their accounts to customize their child's education. And Marty, as the research shows, I think that when these programs get started, the districts have an incentive to to improve and compete.
Marty, you've talked about Illinois a little bit too, I believe, right? And that's a state that, you know, demographically more democratic. Do you want to take a minute to talk about success there? And Jeff, we've talked about, you know, Camden a little bit, but we have successes in New Jersey and in Newark and Jersey City. So, you know, I want to emphasize a little bit the success stories that we've had here and in other, what you might call unlikely places. So
yeah, something I might get to is that New Jersey already has several very robust forms of school choice in education, just not in regular K-12 education, but I'll get to that later.
Okay. Marty?
Yeah, so Illinois has it's called a tax credit scholarship program. So I believe now it's capped at $30 million in tax credits, which are awarded to taxpayers who make donations to scholarship organizations. And then these scholarship organizations use these funds to provide scholarships to low-income students in that state to access private schools. It's a small program, but nonetheless, it's a program that was that Illinois managed to pass. I was, you know, I have family and deep roots in Illinois. I have a very blue family, to be honest, that I've grown up with. And I understand that I was shocked to see that, you know, Illinois was able to, that they passed it, but they were able to get it done. And I just think that, you know, as the longer these, look, I'm optimistic. I think the longer that these programs, you know, are around and the more parents, you know, participate in them, you're just going to continue to see momentum for choice.
Interesting.
I want to get back to like the bigger picture of like saving money in New Jersey that could then be used for other things. New Jersey's education spending in dollars per student is the second highest in the country, after New York. According to the most recent data I saw from the NEA itself, we spend $21,300 per student. So any ESA like costing like, you know, $5,000 per student or even up to $10,000, it's going to save money. Like the state would have to have a certain number of public school students switch to private schools to save money, because if we created an ESA, we would have to fund students who are already in private schools, and we have about 200,000 students who are homeschooled or in private schools. But you know, when our spending is so high, over 21K per student, like, you know, we would have savings. And something which comes out less often is that we are actually the #1 state now for education spending as a percentage of GDP. We spend 4.5% of GDP on education versus the average state only spending 3.4% on education. And as I began like my talks, like, you know, our education spending comes at the expense of a lot of other very important services, including services that benefit low-income people. So, you know, there definitely would be progressive results of being able to spend a little bit less money on education. Like when New Jersey's spending on education is so high, there are two ways you could cut it. You could cut spending per student, or you could have fewer students. And if we had fewer students because of an ESA program, you know, there would be savings available for a lot of other good, worthy things.
Well, you know, the other point that you made, and I think is worth a little more emphasis, is I'm always interested in variance analysis. And there's huge variances, even among comparable towns. There are huge variance analyses among comparable states. So we spend far more per pupil than places like Massachusetts and Maryland. And maybe most pertinent now is what the way I put it, is what we spend per pupil on 12th graders versus what we spend on 13th graders, meaning college, obviously. And we spend all this money and then tell everybody to get lost and go somewhere else and build another state's economy, which I find just astonishing. But you know, higher ed has no constituency. Every politician knows that kids don't vote, and so on. That may be changing. They seem to be getting more conscious on everything from battling politicians they don't like to battling short sellers that they don't like, and my other thing that I do. So anyway, but the short shrift that we give higher education in New Jersey to me shocking.
That's right. And I think actually our higher ed, public and private, is actually kind of one of New Jersey's biggest weaknesses. For some reason, which there's no reason for it, but in the 19th century, when a lot of other Northeastern states were building up like great private colleges, we didn't. Like New Jersey has Princeton, but we don't really have another top 50 private college like we have Princeton. And like, there are more like, highly selective, more college seats in states like, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and New York than New Jersey has. But New Jersey's neglect of public higher ed is something that actually is like also from the last 20 years. Like if you look at the comparisons from the 1990s, like New Jersey's public higher ed funding was much higher than it is now. And it was actually like, above the national average, like in the top 10. And now it's actually slightly below the national average. And I think a large reason for the neglect of public higher ed in New Jersey is because we've started to spend so much on pre-K to 12 education. In 2006, when we increased the sales tax by 1 cent, half of that money was reserved for the property tax relief fund, i.e. education. And, since so many things are not sales tax eligible now anyway, you have like a lot less revenue growth in the general fund. And since public higher ed isn't a federal mandate, it's not a state constitutional requirement, like it's something that's been left behind and has been flat funded year after year after year. And actually the amount of money per student that New Jersey's public colleges get doesn't make any sense. Like, some students get a few $1,000s more per student than other colleges. Doesn't make sense. Yeah, and you're right. It's political though, but I think what's required it budgetarily is that like you have this like juggernaut of wanting to increase pre-K to 12 education spending. And to me, the most clear-cut example is the neglect of public higher ed. The neglect of New Jersey Transit also is a victim and something that's been a net negative for us.
Yeah, it's very hard to get politicians to see trade-offs because I just know so many people who think, well, all we need is a little bit more revenue. And we don't have time to get into it. Since we started 5 minutes late, I'm hoping Mr. Looney will let us end 5 minutes late. You're right. I mean, Jeff, you've done very good work on out-migration and maybe what some of the constraints are on tax policy. What I want to just introduce one.
Why the neglect happens though, it's political though. Like for New Jersey Transit, that I'm sure that New Jersey Transit's workers would rather New Jersey Transit get more money, and all the commuters would rather they get more money, but there aren't as many public transit workers as there are members of the NEA. The NEA has about 200,000 members all in, and public transit riders aren't organized like the NEA is. So it's just, it's political. It's political dynamic.
There's one more different concept that, is widely talked about, but we haven't talked about here. There is I'm going to just read a sentence from an op-ed by Nick Kristof in the New York Times in February of 2009. Yeah, here's a guy he's, I think, really smart, a Rhodes Scholar, etc. And he had a eureka moment in 2009 when he said, good teachers matter more than anything, and went through other variables, class size, whatever. And, there's been a lot of research on that. But does that tie in to the whole choice movement? Can we just spend a minute or two on that?
Sure. So it's interesting. Many parents and teachers often express that they prefer smaller class sizes. You have more individualized instruction, things like that. It makes jobs of the teachers easier, and so forth. But that's precisely what school choice is doing as well, though. It's offering kind of this outlet for a small, usually it's for a small group of people, but when students leave, class sizes get smaller. But when it comes to, when you mention choice, though, that's when you hear a lot of pushback, and a lot of opposition from teachers as well. But I'll just say from my personal experience, I mean, in my personal thought, I think that class size, it depends. I think it depends on the teacher, but I don't think that if you have like 30 or 40 students in a classroom that, that's going to be hard. I taught in Japan for 5 years, and the teachers are very good and amazing. And, so you have a smaller, in Japan is an example of a system where you have a smaller number of teachers, but they're very skilled and they're getting in front of the students.
I would think that it might improve teacher quality for two reasons. One is you are increasing overall education spending because you're inducing parents to spend a lot of their own money. Mm-hmm. And public schools would have more money per student, like if there were a robust voucher system. And the private schools, of course, would have more money to spend on teachers. But also, I think if we had a robust school choice system, you would have a lot more different types of schools. There would be more experimentation in educational models. And people who are frustrated with the public schools because maybe they think they emphasize one thing too much, or maybe they think public schools have too much testing or something. The teachers themselves would more likely be able to find good fit schools. Like you would have less of a one size fits all system. And I think that would satisfy some teachers. Maybe teachers who are really passionate about, teachers would be more likely to find schools which are in their own niche, I think. And I would think overall it would increase teaching quality.
Yep. Yep. Steve,
wait, actually something else, a difference between the Catholic schools and the public schools, I think, is that the Catholic schools are actually they're less into progressive education, like John Dewey and what comes after John Dewey. And perhaps that would increase teaching quality. Although that's not a point. I would want to know what other people think of that.
Steve, tell me on time, on the schedule, we've about run out. And I was
you've got, I think I hear a request for more time and it's granted. So it'd be great to hear from Lou Andrews, or if he has a question, or maybe some other folks, but up to you.
No, I'd like to open the floor for some more.
I'd just like to take off on something that Jeff was saying earlier when he talked about the fact that you've got so many people, kind of mortgaging themselves to get into wealthier school districts because presumably the education is better. At least that's what people think. One of the best books I've ever read on school choice was by, of all people, Elizabeth Warren.
Thought you might
who, when she was at Harvard, and made her name as a bankruptcy expert. And she wrote a book about 20 years ago called The Two-Income Trap, in which she talked about the fact that the single greatest cause of bankruptcy in the US is middle and upper middle class parents trying to afford homes they really can't afford in communities with so-called better schools. And before she ran for senator, she spent about 10 years promoting school choice because she said that would give people the freedom not to have to buy into the most expensive neighborhood. And I'm curious why the panel thinks, especially in the wake of the subprime crisis, the financial crisis 10 years ago, which had so much to do with real estate, why that isn't a bigger issue. I mean, why don't parents see that they have not only do they have more freedom under school choice, but there's potentially a tremendous financial incentive.
Let me think. I think because the progressive voices for school choice don't have the kind of funding that maybe the conservative voices for school choice have, and the conservatives want to emphasize different things. And there are political dynamics that make it very hard for progressives who do favor school choice to speak up about that, because they want to kind of be loyal to the team and not have an intra-left battle over education. I don't know. I don't want to hear what other people say, because I know you're referring to this two-income trap, and I think that the pressure to buy an expensive house in an expensive town really is bad for a lot of people, And it's definitely
Well,
bad for the low-income
she said it was the single largest cause of bankruptcy in the
Yeah.
US.
Well, if I may, the liberal answer to that is a more aggressive, moderate and low income housing policy. So, and as you know, New Jersey has been way out in front on that issue. I believe the first court decision in the United States, Mount Laurel, on that subject. And so I think the liberal answer is forget about choice and let's just move. Let's just help more people move into these communities. What I find ironic about that, at least when it comes to charter schools, is I know prominent people, including former Democratic governors, who are against lotteries for charter schools because it leaves people behind. And I chide them and I say, yeah, but if you throw in a house and raise the stakes and make the outcomes even more unequal, you're all for it. And I haven't gotten a good answer to that. But I think the answer to your question, Louis, is that a lot of progressives just feel help people move and avoid the mortgage crisis. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's the answer I hear.
I would say that
I don't know if that, I understand why that answer might appeal to progressives. I don't understand why it would appeal to average Americans who might not think that crowding into a small number of relatively affluent communities is really the solution to their problem.
I was going to say that, like, you were asking a question about the bankruptcy of families and individuals, but you could also talk about a kind of bankruptcy for New Jersey's, old industrial towns, our cities.
Right.
Like, if you spent a lot of time in Newark and Paterson, Trenton, Camden, like, that actually they have like large sections of middle class type housing, like often like very, very handsome housing from before the Second World War. And yet these neighborhoods in these urban cities are not middle class. And I would say that a large reason for that is because middle class people don't want to buy there, because when you buy a nice house in Newark, it doesn't come with free access to a quote unquote nice school system. So many of these families would rather buy in a more middle class town or an affluent town, even if they're really stretching their money really, really tightly. And even if they're settling for a house they don't like as much, because of the school system. And school choice actually diminishes that emphasis we all have to place on choosing a town with good schools.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, could I ask a question? It's Regina.
Yeah, sure.
So it's along these lines of, where you find support for the idea of ESAs specifically. And my question is probably to Steve and Dick as much as it is to the panel about, I've been reading anyway that the enrollments in many of the public districts have been declining during the pandemic for, individual families that want to get their kids back into class. So they're sending them to private schools or, alternative arrangements, which would make, I would think, ESAs much more appealing to those parents. So I guess my question is, have you talked to, those that are de-enrolling essentially? Because I would think you'd be able to build support for ESAs in that group. Are you hearing from them at all?
I could take that, Regina. Yes. I mean, we are. There's this pent up, we love our public schools, and people do love their public schools, but they've been examining it more and wondering, maybe if I had the funds in my hands, at least I could supplement a little bit. Then that leads to the question of what's good and what isn't good, and what will education look like down the road. So I think there's a lot of rethinking going on. I would like my child to have a better arts class than I get at Ridgewood High School. Could I do this? I'm living on the west side of Jersey City. It's not quite the same as it is in areas of the Heights. Maybe I'd like to have a tutor and share it with 3 people, but I don't quite have that amount of money. So there's a lot of that sort of thinking going on. I don't think it's been broadly expressed, but I think with what's been going on as far as delivery of education and watching what's going on in the online, there's a lot of rethinking, and that could be something that's going to get a lot of traction.
Yeah, because I would think they're paying out now. I mean, right now is the moment, I think, of opportunity. Parents that have not paid tuition, where they never paid tuition before, and they'd be, I would think, strong advocates. But I was just curious if they've been, really pushing to put the ESA because it would supplement what they're already spending.
I don't think it's really in the discourse in New Jersey. I don't think it's known really well. I did see just a really wonderful op-ed that was done by a great new pundit in the NewJersey.com, Looney. I just got an op-ed done, and so maybe somebody reads that, or I guess. Sorry about that. Somebody will start getting the message, but I think the basic discourse in it was, is around other personality sort of related things, and obviously the pandemic and those sorts of things. But I think behind it, the more parents know about these potential, the more it is. But I think we see ourselves in an education mode.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about just politics, and I don't know if this is stating the obvious or what people think about this, but isn't all of this kind of like we're not going to make any progress at all as long as Murphy stays governor? That the NJEA owns him, or vice versa. They're in a pact, and that we can talk and we can have these meetings and we can all make our persuasive, passionate points, and none of it means anything until Murphy's not governor. Is that right?
Well, maybe we could take that up in the panel near the end with Liz. Liz can have a lot to say, not necessarily about Murphy, and let maybe Tom conclude your remarks.
Well, I would say a lot of states have a problem with political polarization and the two-party system. Like the way we do primaries in this country, like only zealots and like true believers like participate in primaries. Like I think in the 2017 gubernatorial election, like Murphy ended up getting like 1.6 million votes, but only like 400,000 people participated in the 2017 Democratic primary. And there was no moderate lean candidate because Steve Sweeney decided that he couldn't win, basically. And you asked a question that doesn't really have a good answer. Like, what can you do with Phil Murphy as governor? And the answer is probably nothing. But I think actually like in this country, like voting reform might actually make the country a lot more democratic, and it might weaken the two-party system and give like progressives who are for school choice, liberals who are for school choice, a viable voting pathway that they could express that. I think there's a lot more to say about that. I know this isn't like a voting reform group, but like something like instant runoff voting would like nullify the importance of winning the Democratic primary. And then people could vote for actually like a more centrist Democratic type person who might be receptive to school choice.
Well, I'll pick up.
I'm sorry.
I'll pick up a little bit on that, Bob. Yeah, look, I think it's going to be hard to get Murphy to be more sympathetic to this position. And so I think the odds are, and that's why I asked questions early on about how do you persuade legislators. I think this is going to be very incremental progress. I think you have to stay focused and do the persuasion work, at the legislative level, hope to build support. And then in New Jersey, if we can't get it all done at the statewide level, maybe you can expand it from Camden to other parts of South Jersey, where the Democratic Party really is different, and Murphy knows he's got to be able to deal with them. If you can expand it from Camden to a few other cities before it goes statewide, that's progress too. So, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right not to be under any illusion about what's going to happen statewide while Murphy's governor. And how much will this November be a referendum on education issues and so forth? Who knows? I mean, everybody says they want lower property taxes and lower taxes in general, but they also want more services. And so, persuading the voters, I think means having, pretty finely honed arguments and getting them out there. And it's not going to happen overnight in the state. I don't mean to conclude on that note, because there's some really good things going on in the state. And I just think we have to keep working on that kind of incremental progress. That's kind of my bottom line.
In a lot of states, there would be an alternative pathway to implementing something like vouchers or ESAs in the form of an initiative. But New Jersey doesn't have an initiative process. So, every law that's passed here has to pass through the legislature and governor. Sometimes things are forced by the Supreme Court.
Right. So, anything else you want to do in this session? Steve, I know we've run now 20 minutes over what we were allotted.
No, you're good. You're good.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, you're fine. No, I really want to thank you, Tom, for all of your remarks, and Marty for the warrior that you are to do this for us. It was great, and Jeff for all the great work you're doing. We may have to unmask you as Mr. Tax Guy, but no, we're not going to do that. State aid guy, rather.
It's a good blog.
That's a great blog. We really, really like it. And a special thanks to Lewis Andrews, who suggested this and was a great supporter for it, and persuaded Marty to do it. We really hope that we can get the same thing done over in New York State and go for that trifecta. So again, Tom and Jeff and Marty, thank you very much for a really helpful panel.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Good. Enjoyed being with everybody. I'll stay on and listen to the rest of it as I can quietly. Thank you.
Thanks. So now we're gonna shift to a promo for E3 has been working for a bit on a for-profit type business that would help school choice, which is going to focus on on pathways, developing pathways for kids, and trying to find a way to monetize that and give money back. So this is just a quick video about getting educated during high school for jobs. So maybe we can key that up.
It's good. How about you? Good. Parents are just not aware of all of the resources and opportunities that are out there, and that's one of the things that I think counselors do best.
We really want to help parents create a plan together on how that student's going to succeed. We'll provide options for students who are not college bound or choose not to be. We'll get them into career technical schools. We'll provide information based on internships so they can accumulate hours. We will really give them any resource that they think is best for their student. That can go from credits, scholarships, personal therapy, whatever they need.
Most of the time when I meet with a parent, it's usually problem solving and strategizing. Typically when I see a parent, there's always a concern of maybe their attendance is poor, or they're not understanding how to succeed in a certain class, or there's a myriad of problems, and I feel like it's usually just a nice collaboration on what we can do for the student to help them to be successful.
So what we're trying to do is to bring that type of counseling and better counseling to every parent, particularly low-income parents, and to build an app that will help make that easier for parents that won't be able to talk directly. So please look out for Education Moms. We're going to try to get that going in this year. So now shifting focus, it is, I think, a very hopeful opportunity for me, at least, to introduce Colleen Dippel, who is the founder and force behind a really innovative and great organization that is called Families Empowered. It's in Houston, it's in Austin, it's in San Antonio, and I think it ought to be a lot of other places. It's touched millions of parents, tens of thousands of families have been helped. Find the right school, get help, talk to counselors, do those sorts of things. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Colleen directly. Colleen?
Hi there. Hey, everyone. I think your folks have been on for many, many hours. So I'm going to try to be upbeat and helpful and brief. But thanks for having me here from Texas. I just got to say, sorry about my lighting. My 15-year-old will be appalled, and my 10-year-old would probably give me her TikTok advice. So, but Steve, you look great, super clear, crisp. Liz, yeah, I like your background.
Well,
See Bob there.
We're gritty out here. We can keep you on for hours. You know.
Yeah.
So,
well, I love seeing people's faces. So for the folks who are and I get it, we're all multitasking, but so I'm happy to be here. I'll just tell you really quickly, and we can kind of, Steve, I know you have some questions, but Families Empowered is a non-for-profit parent service organization. We've been serving families in the what I'd call school choice space, but really just like parent empowerment space for 10 years. This is actually our 11th year in Texas. So I founded the organization and been running it. I kind of love my job. Every time I say I'm going to quit, I just get kind of reeled back in. So we started serving families in Houston, and now we are serving families in San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and we are expanding to Fort Worth. So very excited about that. We'll have a statewide footprint. We provide parents with information about school options. So we work with district schools of choice, magnet schools, even traditional neighborhood schools, charter schools, private schools. We do not have an ESA or voucher in Texas, but we do have ACE scholarships. And then we have a number of private schools that have already, they've raised private dollars and are very committed to ensuring that they've got, diversity and equity and like lots of access. So we also work with the Texas Homeschool Coalition, right? So we are not a school organization. We don't promote a certain kind of school. We are a parent service organization, and our belief is that parents know best. I think I heard that before. I've been like lurking and listening as I've been doing my multitasking emails. So, but really, choice is important, and all the regulatory stuff y'all have been talking about and the infrastructure stuff and the funding, it's all really important. And if you build it, they will come. But the reality is, the questions that you all are struggling with around, equity, access, what I'd argue is if you create, most sophisticated markets have market mediators, have people who help facilitate that market. And we've thought a lot about the supply side, and rightfully so, because it's all regulated. We're talking about government dollars, or we want to, Bob's probably like, no, we want to deregulate. But we are, but there is this, like, there's a demand side, right? And so what you want is accurate, actionable information in the hands of the consumer, who is the parent. So we view our own parents as our customers. We trust them, and we provide them with free service that is unbiased. So we don't have a dog in the hunt. We're not the fix the district people. We are not the charter waitlist people. We are not the voucher people. We're the parent people, and we do a lot of listening, and we do service. And so I'll kind of get into how we do that, but I would argue anybody who's building a really complex system of school options, you're really naive to think like people are just going to hunt and peck. And I think some issues around, do the affluent have access, and do the folks who are, under-resourced have access is really an important question to ask. Here's the thing, you don't need to over-engineer this. Like, poor people aren't trying to scam the system or steal money. Like, they love their kids. They want access to good schools. You don't have to do much, but it is important to make sure that you have information about all these options readily available, because there are rules to the game, right? So we do things like, we have a 5-day-a-week bilingual call center. Parents who are like, hey, I don't understand how to fill out this scholarship application. Like, we actually help with that. We do texting. Like right now we have, this is my team's like, hey, we're on Facebook Live with a charter school called NIOS in Austin. We love that school. We're supporting that school. We'll reach probably 500 families. So we have been serving families. We've served families through the pandemic. We provided uninterrupted service. Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Go ahead.
So just to understand, so people know about you. You've gotten out there and gotten known. So I'm a parent, and I see that I can get some information about schools. I get a phone number. Yep. Who answers the phone? How does this work?
Yep. So a couple things. There's several ways for parents. They hear about us, they can come to us. So that's through social media. So Facebook, our website. If a parent goes to our website and they want to speak to a human being. Like some people can figure it all out with the website, right? And we've got lots of resources on there in Spanish and
So
English.
this is like a, I don't like my school and I want to find another school type of parent.
Could be I'm moving from New Jersey or New York to Texas because I don't like state income tax, you know, or I need to find a job. So like, sorry, I'm a former New Yorker. I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and like everybody is lots of tension around this, but I'm kind of like, come here, you'll have more cash. No, but I go to New York and New Jersey all the time because, yeah, I miss hard rolls and pizza and my family. So, so if you're moving, it's sometimes moving, it's sometimes I'm dissatisfied. It's sometimes it's a transition year. It's middle school, it's high school, it's, you know, something like that. A lot of our families are in crisis. They're in schools that are failing them and not working for them and not getting the job done. And so that's a reality. And during the pandemic, it's been, no, my school's closed. Where's there an open school? What are my alternatives? I'm not going to have my second grader on Zoom all day. I'd like to figure this out, right? So yeah.
So you do surveys. I'm a big interested. Yeah, which these great surveys. And what have you been hearing from parents? What's getting them during the pandemic? What are the problems?
So we've done 3 what we call micro surveys. So, you know, those aren't like, we're not a research organization. We're not a think tank like SERPI. We're a do tank. We serve. And so we do surveys to really get a pulse on what's happening, what parents are worried about, what they care about, so we can design our service and support to that. So we did a survey at the beginning of the pandemic, asking about summer programming, and that's not as relevant to this. We did a survey in the summer asking about whether or not parents were going to go back to school in person, whether they wanted to. Actually, we asked at that point about micro grants. Would they take advantage of micro grants? That could be an ESA, it could be a form of just some support for tutoring, stuff that you all have been talking about. And if so, what would they use it for? I have that survey. These are all on our website. I can put it in the chat. And then we just most recently did a micro survey we had about 500 families respond, so very high response rates. And we asked about this issue of learning loss. I think that came up in the the earlier conversation. Like, do parents actually believe that their kids are behind? You know, there's lots of talk about it. And again, policy folks, no offense to people who are kind of wonks, but policy folks, wonks, you know, people who are looking through all the state numbers or ed nerds, they're actually looking at this and it's a serious question. But, you know, we want to really understand, are parents as worried as all these other folks? And it turns out, you know, our parents, 75% of our parents told us that they are concerned, right? That the parents said to us that their kids needed moderate to overwhelming amount of catch up. And it was pretty significant. So, and then we asked by subject area, and the majority of those folks were talking about math and reading. So they're really worried about math and reading. And so when I think about, so to get to the point before, when I think about what we're hearing from parents is, when we asked about microgrants, by the way, 97%, like it's the highest number we got of our parents said, yes, if there was a microgrant, I would take advantage of it. And 75% of our parents are telling us, and these are working class people, these are not affluent families. Our affluent families don't need us. There are like high paid people who help them, and they just go to a realtor and they buy their way in or buy their way out. So we're talking about working class people, right? 75% are saying my kid's behind, and 97% have told us, and I would like a micro grant. So if y'all like, so if you want to build the case for public policy, there's politics, and then there's sort of like, there's the real world, the reality of the taxpaying consumer. And so, you know, these ideas you're talking about, they're not crazy to normal parents, to moms and dads, right? So those are what our surveys are telling us. And we're in a real pickle here in my state, because we don't have a micro grant, an ESA. We have no way to get resources into the hands of families who have been responsible for schooling. And our schools have been open sort of since September. My kids are not home right now because they're in school 5 days a week in person. One's in a public school, one's in a private school. Both of those schools have been open. So, yeah, I mean, so we do a lot of listening, and I, you know, the fact of the matter is we're moving now into saying, okay, asking again, what are you going to do next year, right? So lots of people are building plans, and lots of policy folks are deciding what is in the best interest of all these people who are the consumers and also the funders of these systems. We're of the opinion we need to be asking those people who will take advantage of these systems what actually matters to them, right? And I think that you have people maybe who are doing that, and then be prepared to service them. So I can tell you a little anecdote about how not to also do a micro grant, and we're experiencing that in Texas right now, if that would be helpful.
Please, yes.
Great. So we had, I think it's some GEARS money came to, you know, like everybody else. And our state is implementing something called an SSES. It is a supplemental special education services grant. It's a micro grant. It was Texas's opportunity to get funds into the hands of the 97% parents who are suffering. And they said, well, we're going to make a carve out, and we're going to make sure that this is for the most vulnerable kids, the most at-risk kids, the kids who need special education services. Great. And then our state said, and we want to make sure not only is it for those kids, but they have to be, you know, low income. We're going to means test it. I can't see my EdChoice people, but I know that their heads are exploding right now because for a whole lot of reasons. You know, and I have strong opinions that are my own personal opinions about that. But you know, I was like applauding our state for finally doing something in the terms of providing relief for children and families. You know, it's good to thank people when they start to do the right thing. So that's where we were. Well, it took them about 6 months to create the infrastructure to deliver the funds. I don't know if 6 months is standard. I don't know if it seems to me that sort of like money in, money out. I mean, now it's federal dollars, so you have to track that. But I have a child who is dyslexic, and I have a child with a 504. So I thought, well, when they promoted this program, and we are promoting this program heavily because we know that special education kids and special needs kids and kids with intellectual disabilities are really vulnerable. And those parents they are exhausted, right? And so we're like, look, every eligible family should be applying for this. This is going to get relief into the hands of families. Well, if you could over-regulate and over-engineer a system, our state did it. And so I decided, you know, because my team, my call center team, is taking calls, helping families with this because we're promoting it. And I recorded my own application. So I did an application. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this as a parent. Now let's see what it's like. It took me 2 days to fill out the application. I was required to provide social security numbers for myself and my spouse and my kid, or my child's student ID, which he brings with him to school. So I didn't really have it. Okay. And then I was required to provide a bunch of financial information that was deeply personal. And I was thinking about my divorced friends who I think don't even speak to each other. And I don't know how they would have completed this application. And then lastly, I had to upload my tax returns, my 1040, a piece of paper that I actually was like, where is my 1040 from last? I don't know. Does my husband have it? So it literally took a person with a master's in education leadership 2 days to fill out an application. And I got denied. It's fine. My child was denied. It is what it is. And I think about like and my child was denied because he doesn't qualify as having an intellectual disability, which he doesn't have. So he's not, he has normal IQ. I mean, if you're a special ed person, there's lots of ways. He is not intellectually disabled, meaning he has a normal IQ. He's the learning difference. But he does require a tutor and accommodations. And I have been paying for that tutor out of pocket. So I didn't qualify, not because of my wealth. I actually, by the way, I just got an email today saying my application was incomplete because I didn't upload my tax information. I was like, no way, I'm not giving the state. I don't know who's seeing this. I don't know what the security is. I'm not putting my social security. So the point is, there you go. There you go. And
we all live that.
No one. So the people designing this system, I have to believe, have good intentions. I know our commissioner, he's a great guy. Good intentions. His staff are great people. I don't think they thought one time about how a real normal parent or a working class person would go through this application. So again, when these systems get designed, and then the unintended consequence, maybe there aren't a lot of people who apply. And then the political message will be, well, we tried to do it, but it was a big failure. No one wanted the money. Nobody applied. We have money on the table.
So be customer oriented when you set these things up.
How about this? Make it really easy for people to get their tax dollars back. How about that? How about also, like, don't slice and dice children as to who is more deserving of support. Every child right now and every family in America is deserving of support. And our parents, the majority, I don't know who the 3% were who said, I don't need a microgrant were, but I suspect they were maybe the random, like super, like we do serve all families. So we have some that are probably like, no, I can pay for my own tutors. But like, that's 3% of our families. Americans need support.
Maybe let's open this up to the floor now for a few questions. We'll do it about 5 more minutes. We're gonna segue to Liz Parlett-Butcher and kind of have an open discussion for everyone. Please stay with us. But for questions about Colleen's program and around there, I think it's a very interesting one. You and I have had a chance to talk about it, but let's let the audience weigh in and find out how it's done.
Yeah, I don't know if people have questions.
Well, I have a quick question for Colleen about Governor Abbott of Texas and your sense of where he is on the choice spectrum and the degree to which. Well, we'll start there. What does he say?
So here's what I'd say. I don't speak to Governor Abbott, and I don't know what he really believes, but what he says is that he supports choice. But I feel like what people say, what you can sort of, if you judge people by what they do, not what they say, then I don't think we have leadership that supports choice. And he says he does, but we don't have an environment where smaller individualized community-based charters are really able to even make it through the authorizing process. We're trying to promote all kinds of district choice, and districts just aren't biting. They're not willing to do it, even when money is thrown at them, incentives are provided, and it's like, why aren't they doing it? It's like, because they don't want to innovate, right? And
because they like power more than money, I think. Well, but then let me just pivot to then, Dan Patrick, your lieutenant governor, has been a huge champion of school choice for years, and so I'm wondering if you see prospect, maybe this will bore everyone else from New Jersey, but do you see if there's a future Governor Patrick, would that rewrite this whole private school choice stalemate in Texas?
Well, I don't know, because Governor Patrick has a lot of power. And, when he was, he would say when he was in the Senate, I can deliver this and that everything will die in the House. And now he's lieutenant governor. And, somebody said on your earlier session, was you all were speculating as to whether or not if you had a new governor in New Jersey, would things be different? It's sort of like mayoral control. Like you have a legislature too, right? So I don't know, would Dan Patrick make a difference? he's been saying for years and years and years that he cares about school choice, but look where we are. I mean, so I'm not so sure who's in charge really at the state level. But my view is that our state leadership does not support school choice, despite the fact that we are the reddest of the red state. We care a lot about tort reform. We care a lot about all kinds of other things. Redistricting is going to be more important. But we don't even have teachers unions, but our teacher associations drive policy in education in our state as much as anywhere else. That's my view. That said, you know, we have, ready for this, 100,000 families in our database at Families Empowered, 100,000. And this, through the pandemic, we reached 1.8 million people. We reached more people than ever before. So they're gonna have to walk the walk with their talk. And I don't know what that's gonna look like. So yeah, that's us.
That's an incredible amount of reach. And there's power in that reach.
Well, I think that the real key for us is to turn this into, so we launched a C4 through the pandemic. That was a pandemic project. Some people made bread. I was like, nah, let's start a C4. I'm not interested in making sourdough bread. And I think that that's what's gonna have to happen. I think, Bob, to your point, to get some movement, I think we are gonna need to have constituents who care about this issue. And we have some of the same problems you all brought up before, which is most of our parents tend to be what I would call working class or working poor people. This wasn't a suburban issue. People move to the suburbs for schools and they vote. And so, but now school choice is a suburban issue to some extent because of the pandemic. So I think you're right. Like, I don't see how we're gonna get more options for families that are better for kids without having voters and taxpayers and parents knowing about this and engaging on this issue.
So Colleen, please stay on. We are heading toward the final panel, unless you want to set another one up. And this is a sort of three-way moderated by Bob Bowdon, Dick Zimmer, and Steve Looney to introduce Liz Parlett Butcher, who is just terrific. Introduced to us actually through National School Choice Week, and which is such a shame, but it's the way people connect. But she's been great in helping us in getting this organized. She runs the New Jersey chapter of the Association of American Educators, which is the CEO in the organization down in Washington. It's the premier alternative professional education association. So it is a voluntary organization that has grown pretty rapidly, and Liz has had a great role here in New Jersey and I think nationally with them as well. She was born on the Jersey Shore, so wife and mother of four. She has been very active in her shore community and has been very active in kind of spreading the good word about AAE. So I think what we'll do is we'll spend about 15 minutes learning a little bit more about all that organizing effort's been going on and all of that. And then we'll open up for a general forum for those of you who have been patiently listening, to me and others for just general questions and reflections on today, which we will duly record and amplify across the ether. No, so we won't do that.
Let me start. Okay. Liz Butcher is the president, is involved in the Association of American Educators. And I would like to ask her, by the way, Steve has my questions that that I sent him because I can't keep dropping my connection. But could you tell us about the Association of American Educators for starters?
Sure. Sure. Thank you. I'm always going to call you Congressman. So thank you so much for having me, everybody. It's really an honor and great pleasure to be among so many wonderful education advocates today. And please, by all means, amplify and elevate your voices and get it out all over, Steve. AAE, as some of you may know, is the largest national non-union professional educators association. We're currently in all 50 states, and I have been with the New Jersey chapter coming up on 3 years in late February. And our members align with our vision in ensuring that the teaching profession, is student oriented first. So we're big enough in that we can offer a wide variety of professional development opportunities for all of our educators, but we're small enough in that our members don't have to deal with a lot of red tape and bureaucracy. So they have access to not only myself directly at any time, but they also have access to our executive team and our national team internally, because we're not that big. So we're not as big as a union.
So are you an alternative teacher union?
So we're not a union, right? So we're a professional association, and there are differences, right? And so some might choose to view us as an alternative to a union. They may join AAE because they weren't satisfied with their union. And we're having difficulties, obviously, making sure that we amplify our voice. I'm the only person on the ground in New Jersey, so I appreciate amplifying and elevating anywhere and any opportunity I can get. They don't know about AAE. They don't realize that there is an alternative professional education association out there who serves educators, who offers professional development, who offers liability protection, who offers access to legal counsel. But we do it collaboratively. And so there are big differences here between AAE and a union. We also don't engage in collective bargaining. So we make sure that the autonomy and sort of the home rule of, right now I deal a lot with public charter schools, remains with, so that they can govern and rule their budgets how they feel is best for them.
I have a quick question. Is the existence of collective bargaining the official definition of a union versus, we heard Colleen mention the teacher association in Texas, that not being a union, and a lot of us roll our eyes at these kinds of distinctions, but is collective bargaining the sort of official definition of when it's legally a union?
Bob, I really don't know the answer to that question, whether or not that's what makes a union a union. I mean, I'm sure you could get a lot of different answers depending on who you ask that question to. But there's another distinction in that not only do we not engage in collective bargaining, but we're nonpartisan. And so the way that we are structured, we're not allowed to be political. Okay, so when they pay their dues to us or their membership fees, we are $198 a year or $16.50 a month. And we're not allowed to put any of that money to political causes, political campaigns. We cannot lobby. So we cannot engage or support or oppose political candidates, political campaigns. And so a lot of our members find that very refreshing. Another distinction is that when you join a union, you have to get a certain percentage of members to opt into the union in order to belong. So I'll give you an example. We recently had the Camden Charter School Network join AAE, and we had the majority of their members join, but we have a lot of members who belong to AAE. We might have 1 or 2 members who belong, from whether that's a district public school, a Catholic school, a university or a college, a charter school. We don't need a percentage to join. You can opt in or opt out of AAE at any time. There is no, like the Janus decision, which I'm sure, Bob, you're going to ask or someone's going to ask about. We don't require some silly, you have to, opt out within 10 days of your hiring anniversary date in order to leave AAE. Absolutely not. No, it is your choice whether you want to opt in or opt out of AAE. And all you need to do is send me an email and say, that's it, I'm done. I don't want to belong to AAE anymore. And that's all she wrote.
Can you compare your dues to the dues of the NJEA?
Well, I think the last time I checked, the NJA was right around 1,300 a year, and that a lot of that depends on the local, right? So some of the local unions charge more depending on where the school district is in the state of New Jersey. So there's a percentage, which Bob probably knows better than me, but there's a percentage that goes of their fees to the local union, the state union, and then the national union. So we're $198 a year versus, almost $1,400 a year, or some cases, $1,200, between $1,200 and $1,400 a year is what those teachers or educators are paying to belong to the NJEA. It's a big difference.
Great. How did the AAE get started?
Well, when we think about choice, that's how it began. It started with our former executive director and founding member, Gary Beckner, who resided in California. And at the time, he was an insurance consultant. And he was approached by a group of teachers who were sort of disenfranchised by their local union, but they didn't have any other choice. They needed a professional education association that was going to look out for them and their interests. They needed liability protection. We say all educators who are around children should have liability protection, and the umbrella policy at the school is not enough. And so he thought to himself, well, I sell insurance and liability protection is the number one thing that they need. And that's how AAE began. That was the vision of one man.
And can you compare the NJEA liability insurance to the AAE liability insurance?
The last I heard that NJEA was offering a $1 million individual liability protection insurance policy, where AAE actually offers $2 million in individual liability insurance. So when you think about the cost, and we've been talking extensively about cost savings throughout these panels with their ESAs, we're offering $2 million for $198 a year. They're offering $1 million for almost $1,500 a year. Great.
Could you tell us about the Janus decision and how that's affected your membership and involvement?
Sure. Well, we anticipated sort of a windfall after the Janus decision in New Jersey. But as Bob can tell you, and those who've been working more closely with some of those circles, teachers have to know about it, right? They have to know about the Janus decision in order to know that they have the choice and the right to leave or opt out of their union. And unfortunately, in the state of New Jersey, that really wasn't the case. So a lot of the educators did not become aware of the Janus decision, which basically said that teachers who paid agency fees, so they opted out of their union, but they still had to pay those agency fees, that they could leave their union altogether. And some did and some didn't. And I believe there's ongoing lawsuits right now in the state of New Jersey because a lot of those educators weren't informed by their district administrators that decision, landmark Supreme Court decision exists.
Yeah. So AAE has a program for advocacy also?
Yes, we are. Thanks for mentioning that. We are hugely into ensuring that the elevation of teachers' voices is amplified. Particularly, we've been working very closely with the public charter schools. We have partnership with the Jersey Public Charter School Association. We also partner with Jersey CAN and the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. And we have an advocacy fellowship that we started about 3 years ago. And in year one alone, we had 2 advocacy fellows. One was actually named the first inaugural Charter School Advocate of the Year by the New Jersey Public Charter School Association. Steve, she was from Jersey City. So Rosie Mendoza, who was with the Ethical Community Charter School, she penned nearly 20 op-eds that year. And they were on from the Hudson Reporter to the Star Ledger, anything from school-based climate temperature control to teacher diversity. We have an advocacy director and a dedicated advocacy team, and we will train. We have trainings with advocacy 101, 201, 301, and we have trained probably over 500 educators in the state of New Jersey on advocacy in the past 3 years since the inception of our fellowship. And we always invite any member who wants to be involved in advocacy efforts to come to us. Again, we partner with the New Jersey Public Charter School Association, Jersey Can, and we also hosted our first ever advocacy summit where we partnered with teachers, parents, and administrators, because again, we do believe in being collaborative. It takes a team, it takes a community. We're all hopefully working towards the same goal of equitable education access for our kids.
So well, I could say for one that you're certainly a good partner for E3.
Yeah. Thank you.
How do you access charter school educators to let them know about this program?
So that's a great question. So a lot of it depends on the charter school leaders, right? And sort of whether they'll allow me access to, because we can certainly send out, campaigns or email blitzes, but of course this pandemic has made presenting in person extremely challenging. So we're all doing the best we can to present to them via Zoom. But Harry Lee over at the New Jersey Public Charter Schools Association has been a tremendous partner and a wonderful ally, and he really does help raise awareness of AAE and all of the opportunities and benefits that we offer our educators. And so we've gained access a lot through Harry Lee's partnership.
That's terrific. Any other questions?
Maybe I thought we open up for a little.
I have a question for Liz, actually.
Okay.
I understand your founder, Gary, is sick and I'm worried about him. I don't know to whatever extent you are allowed to talk about this publicly or not, but can you tell us how he's doing?
That's news that's going to be shared soon, Bob. I'm
Okay.
not at liberty to say at this moment, but you will be hearing about it. I anticipate within the next day or so.
Sorry to hear that. Thought maybe we would, and all the best for him, of course. We would maybe open up as we wrap to everyone who hasn't had a chance to ask questions or others to reflect on the day and issues that folks would like to have covered. Let Bob, who's pretty good at this, jump in as moderator.
Well, what's on everybody's mind? I don't know. Anybody have any fresh reactions? Yeah, go ahead, Gay.
I just wanted to, going back to the Janus decision, what was the procedure that the state of New Jersey's teachers, local teachers unions had to utilize in order to inform their people that they had the option of signing up each year to join the union and the locals? I'm just curious about how did it break down where lots of teachers just did not even know that they had that option?
Yeah, and again, I think that went by local district and by local education association. So some of them did their due diligence and they let their members know right away that the Janus decision was handed down, and they did the right thing in allowing them, the opportunity to know about it and that they had the right to make that choice to opt out. Some did, some didn't.
And it's illegal if they did not. Is that correct?
That's for Supreme Court to decide, I believe.
Yeah.
I think it's being litigated.
Okay, thank you.
The state legislature passed a law, I think on party lines.
Right.
Make it very hard to opt out.
Really?
Yeah, what he's referring to is the Workforce Democracy Enhancement Act was what they called it. And in anticipation of the Janus decision, in May, the legislation was introduced, passed, and signed into law in a matter of a few weeks. And that was the legislation in New Jersey that said, all right, well, we'll just make this a little bit more difficult and we'll put up some roadblocks and some barriers, which was the whole, okay, yeah, you can opt out, but you have to do so within 10 days of your hiring anniversary date. Well, you know, most educators, most people don't remember their hiring anniversary date. So, you know, that was sort of that first roadblock, and you know, that's what's, you know,
Yeah, again, where was this made public, where people would know that that was their responsibility?
well, that's up to our media, right? So did our media do their due diligence, right? And in allowing educators to know about the decision.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Does New Jersey have an opt-out for teachers website right now? That I know that the Buckeye Institute was helping setting some of those up nationally around the time Janice happened. Is there a site right now New Jersey teachers can go and learn the steps?
They can go to the Teacher Freedom site. So I believe it's teacherfreedom.org, and they can learn about their opt-out rights at teacherfreedom.org. I can throw it up in the chat box too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask Colleen another question. Any advice for us in New Jersey? You know, much less choice, although we do have some choice, you know, and ways to get the word out. How did you get your great organization started?
Well, we started 10 years ago by actually partnering with high-performing charter schools that have wait lists. So what I would say for schools that have wait lists, what do they do with those wait lists? And most of them just use them for their bond rating or for fundraisers. Like, hey, we have all these kids, we need more buildings, give us more money. What I'd say is that you could start serving those families and helping them, right? Like they're sitting on a wait list. Where are they going? Who's helping them? We pivoted from because we got branded as sort of the charter waitlist people. Actually, charter schools, we partner with awesome charter schools. We love them. But yeah, I'd say first start that way. And then the second thing is if you have someone in your network who's really great at, I mean, Bob's good at this, you know, social media that's not policy focused. I mean, Bob, you might be able to help with it. You could set up really, I mean, parents are on social media. Remember, parents are in their 20s, right? They're in their 20s and their 30s. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on TikTok, believe it or not. So pay some really, you know, smart, awesome, on point young person to set up a Facebook page and start putting out information about options in schools and you know, boost a few posts. It's not a heavy proposition in terms of fundraising, but I bet you can start to build your network. We have a partner in San Antonio called the San Antonio Charter Moms, Inga Cotton. She's a Facebook page. Yeah, she interviews people, she does Facebook Live, she posts stuff. You know, have somebody who's very New Jersey specific. You're a smaller state than Texas. So, you know, and I know you've got Southern New Jersey and Northern New Jersey and the shore, and, you know, I know it's not one, it's a lot like Texas in terms of being regional, but start in a place where you already have choice, right? And build that way. That would be my advice if you need a low cost, high impact way to start reaching people, but I would invest in it, and it's not a big investment.
Thanks.
I agree. In fact, I'm just looking, Liz, you pointed out the teacherfreedom.org. It's, you know, it's a site where it says select your state, and then you can select New Jersey, and you can come up, you know, pull that up. It kind of looks like a boilerplate thing where a lot of the same information is, you know, presented nationally. And I would think New Jersey could use its own website targeting public school teachers with a here's how to quit kind of message that's, you know, that feels more specific to the state.
There is, Bob, that's a great point. When you go to teacherfreedom.org and you sort of are able to click by state what your opt-out rights are, there is a template. So that's one of the things that came up in some of the polling that they did in, I think, 2019 and 2020,
where teachers didn't know they had a right to leave. And if they did know they had a right to leave, they didn't know how to go about doing it. Like, who did they have to inform? And, what did the language of that letter look like? And what if they were challenged on it? Then what? So they got scared, right? So there is actually a template that's provided in that drop-down menu of, exactly print it out, sign it, and they can just scan it back to their administrator or whomever.
I mean, for example, it could have, what I'm missing is just a narrative, several paragraphs writing to say, here's the situation. You're a teacher in New Jersey. This is how, you might be aware of how much you'll save in dues, but we want you to know, here's the 10-day window, all that stuff. I don't see like a narrative section where it's kind of explaining it all on this site.
Okay. I can get it. I'll have to check it out.
Right. I mean, I think that would be a pretty, it could, it'd be done once and then it could be read by teachers, thousands of teachers, for month after month.
Maybe a consulting gig, Bob. It sounds like they could use that.
I mean, they do have stories, Bob, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, they do have some stories. And I know there are a few educators featured, one of them in particular from the state of New Jersey, who talked about, her choice in wanting to belong to both the union as well as AAE. So there, if you scroll to the bottom, there are some stories, but
I see the links to news stories. I think that's fine, but I think it's desperately missing just a narrative to say, if you're a teacher at a public school in New Jersey and you're thinking about quitting a union, here's what you need to know, like a write-up like that.
Sure.
That's all I'm trying to say.
Got it. I'll make sure I let them know. I'll have them call you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then I'll
You can run the feature piece.
Yeah.
Any other views out there? Tom Byrne, Pete, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Or Valerie, where are you? Silence.
Folks, I have to leave. Thank you so very much. It was really edifying. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think, again, in my view of the whole thing, again, at the risk of repetition, is that the election's a big deal. Of course, we're a 501c3. We don't take official positions, but I can suffice it to say, I think the election will be a big factor in the future of the state's school choice. And it appears that Mr. Chitterelli will be the lone Republican running. It seems to be the case now. So I don't know, Dick, what do you think about the political handicap?
Hello?
Hello?
Hello, Valerie. Wait, you're on mute. Take yourself off mute. There you go. We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. So nice to listen and be involved. I know, I just wanted you to know, I feel like I'm amongst the VIP of this conversation. This was enlightening. It was rich. It was relevant. It is on time and it's spot on. So nice to say hello to everyone. I am the principal of Bridgeton Public Charter School. So it's so nice to meet you. I've been busy multitasking throughout the whole thing, and I heard my name and I was like, oh! so nice to meet everyone.
Oh, thanks.
Where is your school? Tell us a little about it.
Thanks for joining, Valerie.
All right, so my school, hello, Miss Liz Parlett Butcher. You need to know I affectionately call her the Queen. And she calls me the Queen too for many different reasons. So I am located in Bridgeton, New Jersey, which is part of Cumberland County, way down South New Jersey. I have been the principal. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Have you found the state to be, the Murphy era to be difficult or the same or what?
Oh, see, you tried to get me in trouble. So I've been in education for a long time, Cumberland County for about 7 years. And as far as his stance and what we're doing, it hasn't, I don't know if I'm the right person to speak about it because I just run the governance of education and instruction. but there's some other folks that may have a better take on the difference between the governor of today.
No, we want your take. We want your take. Was there? Have
So
you
this is my
detected any difference?
All right, see, I get it. I love it. So this is my take. My take is this. I think more needs to be done. I've been in this world for a minute, and I think that we do need a larger voice on the table based on conversation when it comes down to spending, based on conversation when it comes down to what we do and what we're accountable for, as opposed to my sister public schools. So that's my professional take on that. How about that?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Tom, any remarks or reflections on today? Just unmute. You got to.
I had to tune out a little bit for my day job. Sorry, but
Did you cover that short? Did you cover that big short?
No, I was on the other side of a couple of good run.
That GameStop is amazing. Wow.
I didn't do GameStop, but I had some others. Anyway, so I thought it was a a good discussion. I try to keep our panel focused on the merits, but the politics you all recognize are a huge challenge. And to the extent that it can be top down from the governor's race, great. To the extent it has to be bottom up, as I said earlier, and expanding gradually throughout the state, number one, and building a constituency in the legislature, number two. Whatever moves the ball forward, so to speak, is a good thing. So I enjoyed being part of it today.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel. It was great. Dick Zimmer, any final reflections? I know you've had some internet challenges, and it could be they could have be intentional.
Well, no, I don't think they were, based on what I was able to hear, it's a terrific program.
Good. Okay. Well, maybe that's time to end. Claudine, thank you for the award. That was great. And
thank you very much.
Sophie for moderating, and all of you great folks. Bob Bowdon, any final thoughts?
I mean, I've been kind of giving him along the way. It was Dick Zimmer who kind of first taught me to look at the politics before you get your enthusiasm into the rose-colored glasses optimism area. Yes, I think, and it seems right now that the current state of where Democrats are as a party is more anti-choice than it's been since I've been in this movement. I mean, Bill Clinton in 2011 spoke at the National Charter Association annual conference. And at many other times, he was considered a charter supporter, Bill Clinton, as was Barack Obama. We're now in an area where we have both the governor and a president who seems leaning the other direction harder than I've ever seen. So that's discouraging. We'll have to see what happens in November.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, maybe everyone's the reflection of what they think the voters want. And the good leaders are the ones that get out in front of this. And maybe it's some of our job to get the voters to understand what they want and to express that and move that and find those leaders. But again, thanks to everyone. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say there, and I hate to end on an apologist note, but it helps when you're trying to persuade to be inside the head of the other person, I think, right? So if you're a Democrat, and I'm not making excuses, I'm just trying to read out some reality. You're Cory Booker and you care about prison reform. And he's worked across the aisle with people like Rand Paul and others on that. Democrats care a lot about global warming and a variety of other issues. So a lot of these people think, rightly or wrongly, am I a martyr to this one cause when I care about other issues? And part of the job is to persuade them that this really matters. in a lot of different ways. It's a matter of anything from social justice to fiscal responsibility to long-term economic progress. So I think the challenge is to stay with the program and be mindful that there are people who in the Democratic Party who are sympathetic. We've discussed that today, but who need to be persuaded that this is not only a good idea on the merits, but is worth more political capital than you've been willing to put out there.
That's good advice.
Yes.
Well, with that, thanks to everyone. Look forward to engaging even more during 2021 and have a good rest of the day. We're the real warriors to make it all the way to 134 or 35.
Last one
Take
standing.
care. Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.